Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the early 60s, and at 10 years old, my best friend Martie lived in the neighbouring farm to ours. We hung around together all the time. We were as thick as thieves in those days, like brothers to each other. When I reminisce over my childhood, all my wistfully nostalgic memories invariably always involve Martie. It would seem that in my family, I was the unheralded, serendipitous, unplanned surprise that no one could have forecast arriving on the scene so late in the day. Somehow I had tenaciously subjugated the odds of defeating my mother's fastidious birth control regimes, rendering her pregnant. By the time I was born, all four of my older sisters had successfully graduated from college. They were no longer living at home, so for me they were more like aunts than sisters, as the age gap between us was quite substantial. In a nutshell, you could describe me as an only child, who was rarely favoured, cherished and beloved by my father. But I hasten to say he never bought me a coat of many colours, like Joseph in the Bible, which would have been rather nice, but there you go, you can't have everything. Suffice to say my dad, as he'd always yearned for a son, had given up on the expedient ambition of ever siring one. He believed his sperm was genetically predisposed to producing exclusively female offspring, which would have been exceedingly useful if my mother had been a cow and my father had owned a dairy herd, which he didn't, of course. Jokes aside, in truth he believed his sperm was firing off female 2X chromosomes on all cylinders, as his older brother Montgomery had raised 14 children, of which none had been boys. What were the odds of that happening? When my mother was pregnant with me, they automatically assumed I was yet another girl on the way. Indeed, they were so confident about this fact that my mother had already knitted pink clothes for me, and at her hen party all her girlfriends had given her pink gifts. She had decided upon a name for me. I was to be called Rosalind Holmes. When I was born, that's after a great deal of kicking and screaming, I took quite a lot of time leaving the safe confines of my mother's dark, cosy womb and entering upon this world. The nurse said, "Congratulations on your baby, Mr. Holmes," to my father. "It's a boy." As she came out of the hospital room to usher him in, to my mother's room, who was sitting up in bed, holding me in a pink blanket and brightly smiling at my father, "Can you believe it?" she says to him. "Your wish has come true. We've had a boy." My father thought there was a grievous mistake. There had to be. His whole family line only ever produced female offspring, did they not? But when he checked my anatomy, he realised I was indeed a boy. He began to dance around the hospital ward jubilantly, singing at the top of his voice. He was so thrilled. Everywhere he went, he told everybody, "I've had a boy. I have had a boy." It was a miracle of note. At least my father thought it was. He was convinced the prayer request that he had placed in a tiny crack in the Wailing Wall in Israel had finally come to fruition. even if God had taken a hell of a long time to finally answer it. My mother told me never ever to tell my sisters about my father's rapturous delight that he had exhibited that day, as she didn't want my sisters to feel less appreciated by him. It must have taken my parents 2 weeks to finally agree on a name for me. In the end, it was decided that I would be called Cameron Fergus Holmes, as I came from a strong Scottish lineage in my distant family roots on my father's side, a heritage he carried with a measure of pride. One beautiful morning in early spring, in western Kentucky, when the Japanese magnolias, the eastern budwoods, dogwoods and cherry trees were extravagantly in blossom, which me and my friend Martie called confetti trees, as they were covered in a plethora of pretty blooms, and the moment they burst forth with blossom, we absolutely knew that spring had arrived, for this was to us the quintessential first sign that winter was finally behind us. We had so much to look forward to. It would mean that this year's corn would soon be planted, and that the sunny weather was going to return, which is something we eagerly embraced, especially in spring, which is quite simply the best time of the year here, as the temperature is quite literally perfect, neither too hot nor too cold. Regretfully, late summer in Kentucky can sometimes be hot and muggy. If me and Martie were birds, we would definitely have serenaded and embraced the arrival of spring with joyful twitters. But given we were both tone deaf and couldn't sing at all, it was good that we didn't open our mouths at all, I hasten to say. We could explore the countryside more in spring than any other time of year, rough it on our mountain bikes, climb trees with the weather being a congenial friend, rather than harassing us with frequent bouts of inconvenient, annoyingly biting, hostile, cold, wet weather. I remember my mother used to hate me coming indoors after I'd been running around the farm in winter. There was so much mud everywhere. I don't even know where it all came from. It seemed I had this masterful way of plastering the place with mud. It would invariably end up in the most obscure places, like the side of the sofa, on the edge of the refrigerator, or in my father's sock drawer, which would drive my house-proud mother completely dilly. "For goodness sake, Cameron," she would say, "how many times have I told you to leave your muddy boots in the entrance hall? Why don't you ever learn?" If we got thick snow during November, our farm would become an adventure playground for us, where me and Martie would go tobogganing, snowshoeing and snowball fighting together, which was loads of fun for 2 10-year-old boys. We also always made a massive snowman, using my father's bowler hat and a candy-striped scarf that had once belonged to my grandfather. I grew up in an old, very dignified-looking whitewashed farmhouse, with huge French windows, duck-egg blue shutters, and a grey slate roof. It was a kind of congenial, warm home, dribbling with character, oozing with charm, and seeping with humour. I believe our house did have a sense of humour, for sometimes it would seem to be laughing with us, as it was a place that had contained and harboured the laughter of generations of our family before us. I was to learn when my grandfather was alive. His booming laughter was so loud, it rattled the walls and windows of the house, with his thigh-slapping horse laughs that invariably involved lots of snorting. All these years later, long after his death, sometimes for no fathomable reason whatsoever, the house windows would involuntarily rattle and vibrate. Could my grandfather's disembodied laughter still be causing the walls of our home to engage in a belly laugh? It would seem so. Our sumptuous cosy home had remained nestled in the heart of a viridescent valley for over 250 years. It looked like it harmoniously belonged to the natural environment, as if it folded seamlessly into the indigenous natural flora and fauna, and when the annual cereal grass of the corn crop bloomed and blossomed, swaying in the wind under a gentle breeze, often with a lone corn-bunting bird seen clinging to the grass, it was certainly a spectacular sight to behold. We always had a scarecrow standing up in the field. My father created it as a perfect imitation of himself, and it was an excellent likeness. There were many times I thought the scarecrow actually was him. He had designed it to be portable so that it could be moved around the fields frequently, so the birds never ever cottoned on to the fact that it wasn't actually my dad. Our symmetrical farmhouse had stood up proud and tall. It demanded your attention. It seemed to sense that it was loved and adored. It possessed a tin roof. I never forget that, as there is nothing to beat the sound of rain pelting down on a tin roof. It's one of the cosiest feelings in the world. Our 2-story farmhouse was a substantial size, overlooking fields, vast fields of corn, from beyond our front yard. My mother kept our home naturally in pristine condition, as she derived a certain amount of pleasurable satisfaction from buffing up the house so it shone like a bright new pin. You'd have to scour our home with a fine tooth-comb to find even a drop of dust or a lone cobweb dangling on the corner of a high ceiling. I remember it always smelt of homemade bread and of lily of the valley. The latter was my mother's all-time favourite perfume that seemed to linger all over the house and become one with its natural smell. In my childhood there was one day that protrudes in my mind, like an elevated ocean wave, leaping and soaring and bounding above all my other memories, so much so that it is indelibly entrenched in my mind, and like a stubborn piece of heavy farm machinery, it simply refuses to budge from my recollections all these 50 years later. For me that morning is as clear and translucent in my mind today as it was all those years ago, almost as if I'm looking through a mirror. I awoke with the pale blue and grey mohair curtains on my window, blowing in a breeze, billowing against the window, as it had been left slightly ajar overnight. A cool breeze blew generously into my room, filled with the sweet scent of magnolia blossom, and the whole room was infused with a soft warm light that appeared brighter than usual. The warmth of the morning sun dappled my blue comforter in a bright golden light. My bedroom in those days had Wedgwood blue walls covered with posters of bush planes flying over mountains and glacier lakes in Alaska, and shelves displaying model aircraft, as I was exceedingly zealous about planes in those days, and secretly fancied myself flying my own bushcraft over Alaska some day. Suffice to say, that has never happened, although I did become a car mechanic later on in life, working with all kinds of engines. I trudged over to the window, glancing out of the glass pane. I could see my mother in the backyard with her chestnut flip bob blowing in the wind. She was wearing a pink and purple flowering shift dress with a gingham apron tied around her middle, and carrying a bowl of chicken seed in her hand, which she was throwing out generously for the hungry chickens, a mix of Rhode Island Red, Plymouth Rocks, Dominique and Brahma chickens, who were pecking the ground happily. I could see that the sky was so blue, without a white fluffy cloud in sight. The confetti trees in our yard were ablaze with blossom. It was a kind of congenial, happy day that had me dashing to my wardrobe to throw on my clothes, a short pantsuit with long socks, and my sneakers, as I wanted to be out there, basking under the warm rays of the sunshine, exploring the countryside on the back of my bike with Martie. "Hi, Mum," I said, running out of the kitchen door towards the shed to grab my bike as quickly as I could. "Sweetheart," she says to me, "where are you going? Aren't you going to have some oatcakes for breakfast? You shouldn't start the day on an empty stomach. Even our chickens know better than that." Was she kidding, I thought. The last thing on my mind was food. "Not hungry," I shout, as I quickly climb on my bicycle and ride down our long driveway through the gates, taking a right-hand turn on the precarious dirt road that is strewn heavily with rocks towards Martie's farm. And then I cycle past the rusty open cattle gate with the faded sign that reads Moonlight Ridge towards his father's red barn that is about 50 feet away from the main farmhouse, an unremarkable, prosaic-looking, rather deflated, sad, subdued-looking building that has almost certainly seen better days. It seems to be expressing the underlying pessimistic hopelessness of its beleaguered inhabitants. Even the large glass windows of the farmhouse are smeared, as if glass cleaner has not been applied to their surfaces for a remarkably long period of time, while the sagging roof looks like it's crying out for attention. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually leaks. I throw my bicycle up against the barn wall, climbing off my bike, blowing my whistle 3 times as loudly as I can. I wear it around my neck at all times, attached to a red ribbon. Martie never likes me to go to the back kitchen door when his dad's at home. He knows when he hears the whistle that I'm announcing my arrival on the farm, so we can hang out together. I always get the impression that Martie does not like his dad at all. I've never been invited over to his farmhouse when his dad's around, which my mother always says is conspicuously revelatory. She tells me she's seen him around town on several occasions. She'd say, "Scary-looking man, shifty eyes, thin mean mouth. Do you know I said hello to him once? I'm your next-door neighbour. My son Cameron hangs around with your lovely boy Martie. Can you believe it? He just snorted contemptuously at me, walked off, never so much as even acknowledged me. I mean, how rude is that? Mrs. Thomas, who was talking to me at the time, told me not to take any offence by it, as he's naturally a miserable, cantankerous old sod. I do pity his wife, says my mum. Imagine being married to him. No wonder his wife always looks like a frightened mouse. I invited her over to tea once and she said, "No thanks, I really can't. I'd love to see what goes on in that farmhouse behind closed doors." I only had ever been inside Martie's family farmhouse a handful of times, when his mother was always present. She was the most quiet, unassuming woman I'd ever met, the kind of person that almost apologised for existing, as her self-esteem was possibly the size of an ant's egg, minuscule, microscopic. She always gave me the impression that she'd like to shrink into the shadows like a ghost, for she seemed as sad as the desolate house itself, as if she was carrying the weight of the world upon her shoulders, and was almost crumbling and groaning beneath its heavy weight. She was a thin woman with dark eyes and a fragile body, like a doll, that looked like it could so easily break. I always used to clandestinely think that if she was caught up in a feisty windstorm, she might just get blown over, like a feather. Moments after I'd blown my whistle, Martie comes out of the house. At first he doesn't look directly at me. His brown head of hair is fixed on the ground, as if he's wilfully trying to avoid any eye contact with me. Then I see the tall, doleful silhouette of his insolent father. He's standing in the doorway. He's glaring at me, wearing a huge, opprobrious frown on his face. He eyes me objectionably, through indignant, acrimonious, fiery brown eyes. To my horror, he comes marching out of the house, swinging his arms backwards and forwards captiously, as if he wants to strike something down with his fists. I'm quite sure he'd like that to be me. But I'm not his son. He's possibly struggling to contain the explosive fury rising up within him, for his whole face is jiggling with a frustrated angst that he'd like to inject into me, like a hornet's sting. He gives the impression of being like a cantankerous transient sea lion, as mad as hell, almost as if he's looking to pick a fight with someone in order to air his grievances, which will make him feel a whole lot better. "So it's you again, is it, young man?" he says with a loud, sneering roar. "Can't keep away, can you? You're like a nasty, bad smell, always reappearing again and again. You keep blowing that god-awful whistle all the time. Are you trying to wake the living dead with all this noise pollution?" "I'm sorry, sir," I say, flushing. "If you want to see my son, why do you not come and knock on the front door like any normal, respectable kid would do, instead of blowing that bloody whistle of yours? Where did you get it from?" he asks me scornfully. "My father bought it for me, sir," I explain. "He should be bloody ashamed of himself, buying you such a noisy, disruptive instrument. What was he thinking? A kid like you, with a whistle like that? Given half a chance, you'll be blowing that wretched thing all day long. I know what kids like you are like. You just can't help yourself, can you? Thrive on being bloody nuisances, day after day after day. You simply can't stop meddling, can you? In my day, children were seen and not heard. But now you kids seem to think you can bloody do whatever the hell you like. Sod the rest of us. That's the attitude nowadays. It makes me bloody sick. It makes my blood boil. Your mother should teach you some manners, young man. But given your mother, I've seen her around town. Nasty woman she is." "Sir, I only ever used the whistle to call Martie. I didn't mean to make a noise. If you like, I won't ever do it again. I'll come to the kitchen door and knock." Martie's father is not listening to me. His eyes are resting on my bike, parked against the barn wall. "What the hell are you doing, young man, parking your bicycle against my wall? How dare you be so goddamn presumptuous? This is so bloody typical of the young generation these days. No respect for other people's property. You're scuffing up my wall with those bicycle bars of yours. Did your father not teach you to respect other people's property? I suppose not. After all, he hasn't taught you any manners. You've got dreadful parents, young man. I'm surprised that Mr. Butcher, Martie's father, cares about his barn at all, given its dishevelled state. Even his mechanic shop on the other side of the property looks like it's a chaotic hodgepodge of stuff. As Martie's unblunted father blasts away venomously at me, I feel quite intimidated by his mordacious energy, and want nothing more than to run away from him as fast as I possibly can. I've never been spoken to like this so ruthlessly, with such an astringent spite. I can feel tears welling up in the back of my eyes, but I fight them back as hard as I possibly can. I don't want to look like a complete baby. I'm 10 years old, for goodness sake. Besides, I don't want to give this sardonic, corrosive man the slightest satisfaction that he's ruffled my feathers. I want him to think that nothing he said to me has upset me in the slightest. So I straighten my back up proudly, look him directly in the eyes and say to him, "Have a nice morning, Mr. Butcher. Sorry to have caused you so much grief." He scoffs at me, turns around to retreat back to his house, and under his acidic, treacherous breath, loud enough for us to both hear, he spits out, "Bloody kids! They should all be aborted from birth, the whole damn lot of them." He spits on the ground, walks back to the house, slamming the door behind him so hard that I almost jump out of my skin. Phew! All I can say, he's one miserable character. "Sorry about my dad," says Martie apologetically, climbing onto his bike. He's in a bad mood today." Soon we are rigorously cycling back to my farm, to get the hell away from Moonlight Ridge. We park our bikes in the shed, waving enthusiastically to my father, who is sitting very happily on the back of his green tractor, that is chugging away as it plants the corn seed on long ribbons of neatly tilled fertile soil. He waves at us as we run through the green valley towards the large creek of silvery water that is fringed by a spectacular oak and hickory woodgrove that sprawls to the rear of our properties, extending to Martie's father's farm as well. It's when I look up at Martie, I see his black eye. I'm nonplussed. This is the 3rd time in 6 months he's had a black eye. If that's not enough, he's always covered with perplexing, inexplicable bruises that I secretly suspect have a whole lot to do with his crotchety father, who seems to have about as much patience over children as a brown-headed cowbird has over her younglings. She lacks the tenacity to warm her own eggs, so she lays them in another bird's nest, so she can avoid fledgling care and egg-warming duties. "I suppose you walked into a door again," I say sarcastically, as deep down in my gut I know that Martie has been telling me porkies all along. I haven't failed to notice the amount of bruises he's acquired. I've heard every excuse under the sun, from him tripping over the ladder in the barn, falling over the Labrador dog, bumping into a tree, walking through a pane of glass. I've spent enough time with Martie to know that he's not accident-prone when he's around me. On the contrary, he's much more agile than I am. But every time he goes home, it sounds like he's living in a precarious obstacle course and falling all the time. He's always covered in mysterious, ambiguous bruises. Sometimes I've seen him hobbling out of his house in pain, as if he's really been beaten up exceedingly badly. As I previously mentioned, I have my sneaking suspicions that Martie's father is beating him up. But I don't want to make Martie feel uncomfortable by pressing him to tell me about what's really going on with him and his father. But I hasten to say, I do feel rather hurt that he hasn't confided in me, as I consider Martie to be like a brother to me, so we shouldn't be keeping any secrets from each other. I decide to let sleeping dogs lie, allow Martie to confide in me when he desires to do so. I know he's protecting his father's reputation, and honestly I don't know why he bothers. By all accounts, his father has a dreadful reputation in town. He's one of those people that no one has warmed to over the years, nobody even remotely likes. You only have to look at the man to see he's a disagreeable sort. Martie tries to maintain this misleading charade, to keep up the appearances that he lives a normal life, as deep down he longs for normality, like you or I might long for a holiday abroad somewhere. But normality for Martie is a dream on the furthest horizon that is so beyond his reach. I haven't failed to notice the apprehensive reluctance that he exhibits every time he returns home, as if he's desperately trying to summon up the courage to retreat back to the confines of a place that should naturally embody all that is good. It should embody love, warmth, security, safety and comfort, but not for him, it would seem. "Yeah," he says to me, avoiding eye contact with me. "I don't know why I keep walking into that door." As we're ambling towards the creek, we both discover dozens and dozens of tiny doomed, half-dollar-sized baby turtles, crawling over the darkened earth, moving away from the water in the wrong direction towards the fields of neatly sown corn. They're climbing on top of each other, appear dry and disorientated. Me and Martie naturally want to save their lives, so we gather them up in our shirts, dashing over towards the creek. Granted, when they get bigger in size, they can appear mean, hissing, and rear up at you. Yet these little tenacious turtles seem so vulnerable. We sense they desperately need our help. We can't judge their characters based on some of the snappy, large turtles we've encountered in the past. For one of these little turtles may potentially grow up to be an agreeable, likeable fella, if the hands of fate smile kindly upon him, that is, and if his life isn't auspiciously expunged from him by many of the predators that he will have to surreptitiously avoid. Sometimes it's good to give nature a helping hand. Well, that's the way I look at it anyway. We walk towards the edge of the pebbly beach, lower their leathery tiny bodies into the water. They're waving their legs indignantly. Their heads are cranked, but the moment they're plunged into the water, they spring back to life, as if the water itself has energized and revitalized their dry bodies. At first they swim erratically, rather like pigeons across the water, and then once they're submerged, they're gone. We don't even get to see their eyes bobbing above the surface. I think they're so grateful to be reacquainted with the water. We sit down on the side of the creek, close to a large patch of cat's tails, their cigar-like brown spikes rising up in the shallow part of the water. Martie places a blade of grass into the side of his mouth. He begins to chew it. "You know, I didn't really bump into the door," spouts Martie quite suddenly. My heart begins to thump in my chest excitedly. I can smell that Martie is about to tell me the truth. I've been longing for this moment, when he would finally choose to confide in me, disclose what has been happening behind closed doors in that less than congenial home of his. "Well, you're not really accident-prone when I'm with you," I admit, "so I sensed something else was going on." Martie frowns. "You mean all this time you knew I was lying?" he says, looking disappointed. "Why didn't you say anything?" I watch him pulling up one of his long socks by way of distraction. "I guess I figured you'd tell me in your own time. It's your father, isn't it? He does this to you. I can see he's a cantankerous bully. Everyone knows it." "I hate him," says Martie, taking a blade of grass and chewing it in his mouth. "I bloody hate him. Excuse my language. I wish he was dead. I'm not just saying that in the heat of the moment like you probably think I am. I really mean every single word of it. I really wish he was dead." "You do? Well, don't apologise to me. I'm on your side. You're like a brother to me, Martie. Besides, I agree with you. The way he laid into me earlier on, he terrified the life out of me. He's got a barbed, vicious tongue on him. I thought some of those big, mean, snapping turtles could be formidable. But your dad, he's 1,000 times worse. I think I'd rather swim with one of those big turtles in the creek any day of the week than spend even a night under your roof with your horrible dad. Why does he hurt you?" I ask him, my eyes not leaving his face. "He's always angry," says Martie. "When he drinks, he gets even madder. He beats my mother up a lot. I intervene to stop him hurting my mum. So I get caught up in the crossfire. He lashes out at me. He hurts me instead. You've seen how fragile my mother is. I mean, I can't sit back and do nothing, can I? I have to intercede. I mean, if I don't, he's going to kill her. I know he's going to kill her. It won't take him much to snap her neck." "What makes him so mad? Why is he always so angry?" I ask. He's like a firework, and me and my mother are like little matches. And we say one unlikely word, and the firework is ignited, and it explodes. Like the other night, for example, I was sitting having dinner with Mum and Dad at the vintage green formica table in our kitchen. It's always so uncomfortable sitting down to dinner when Dad's there. My mother says to my dad, "Do you want any more chicken casserole?" He finished it all, you see. He only had a little piece of potato left on his plate. He said, "If I want any more bloody chicken casserole, I will ask for it, woman." And then he picks up the plate and he throws it across the kitchen, smashing it into smithereens, so that it's lying shattered all over the kitchen floor. And our Labrador Rover, he races out of the kitchen so fast, he's so scared of Daddy, as Dad sometimes kicks him really hard, and he squeals in pain. He then spouts, "Why does everyone in this house have the brain cells of a plant? Do you not see the potato on my plate, woman? I didn't eat it up, did I?" My mother says, "No, you didn't." "There you are then, woman. Use your brains, girl. If I didn't eat the potato, it means I'm full. If I'm full, it means I don't want any more bloody chicken casserole. And while we're talking about your chicken casserole, it might be nice if you weren't such a lazy bugger, and you put some dumplings in it from time to time. My mother always made dumplings for the family when she made chicken casserole, and she's had many more mouths to feed than you've had. Needless to say, she was a far more superior cook than you are, infinitely better. But that wouldn't be hard, would it? For a start, the food actually tasted good." "I'll make you dumplings next time, I promise," my mother says. My father snorts, "Next time! You'll make me dumplings next time! Oh, isn't that really nice? Isn't that rich? It's always next time with you, isn't it? Always away in the future. You're a lazy bugger. You always have been." And then my horrible father, he grabs my mother by her hair. He pulls her really hard so she's crying out in pain because he pulls her hair really, really hard. And then he drags her to the doormat, and my mother is crying and begging him to stop. She keeps saying, "I'm sorry. I'll make you dumplings next time. I promise you. I'll make you dumplings," she blurts out. But of course, my father doesn't listen. He doesn't care. He's enjoying hurting my mother. He likes it when she's upset. He seems to get pleasure from it. I say to him, "Daddy, please leave Mummy alone. Don't hurt her." I'm standing in front of my mother, trying to protect her. The next thing I know, he plunges a fist right into my eyes. "How dare you interfere, Martie? This is between me and your mother. We're having a nice chat together. Now leave us alone. Go to your bedroom at once. Do you hear me, boy?" "It sounds like your dad's not right in the head," I say. "I mean, why is he so volatile, so explosive? Why doesn't your mother leave him?" We did try to escape once, but my father caught us, dashing into the truck. He locked us both into the closet for a whole week. He fed us dry bread and water. That's all we got." "You're kidding? That's despicable. I'm sure if you told the sheriff, he could be arrested for cruelty." "No, I'm not kidding about it at all. He did do that to us. Now you know why I want to kill him. Now you know why I hate him so much. One day he left his Winchester Model 70 rifle fully loaded on the patio, and I picked it up, and I was longing to pull the trigger. I really was. I wanted to kill my dad. I didn't have the courage to do it. I'm a real wimp. But believe me, it would be an end to our misery. I was standing behind the door. My dad was sitting on the upholstered chair next to the fire. His head was bent over, reading the Louisville Courier. He had no idea I was there. My hand was on the trigger. It would be nothing to pull it back, and then he would be obliterated, gone from the face of the earth forever. And me and my mother, we'd be able to breathe again. We would be free. Living with him is like walking on eggshells every day. Me and my mother are too afraid to say anything, as it'll set him off. Martie pauses for a moment. I can't believe he's actually opening up to me like this. I sense he's relieved to let go of his angst that has been troubling him for a long time. Martie starts chewing a new blade of grass. The worst part of it all is if we say nothing at dinner, he then slams his fists on the table and says, "Why is everyone so goddamn miserable in this house of ours? Why is no one talking? I'm sick of you two, always looking as if you're sulking." My mother will then say something like, "Martie, why don't you tell us how your day was at school today?" So I'll say something like, "It was all right. The same as usual, really." I can't imagine eating dinner in such a tense environment all the time, I say. No wonder your mother looks so afraid. My dad's a big, big bully, says Martie. You know how many times I've dreamed of him just lying there dead? I've dreamt of him being eaten by a pack of coyotes or falling down a landmine. I even prayed to God once to take him away from us because he doesn't deserve to live. I know that is a horrible thing to say about my own dad, but my dad makes everybody miserable. The dog, even his own family members who live far away from here, and me, and most of all he makes my mum very, very sad. I'm scared about going home tonight, he admits. Why? Because you know he'll be in a bad mood. Martie looks at me, his eyes growing round with fear. No, that's a given. He's always in a bad mood. It's just, I was playing with a ball this morning, he almost whispers, and I hit his gun cabinet. When my father, he keeps his rifles there, and I shattered the glass. It looks like a huge spider web crack. I'm too scared to tell him I did it because I know how angry he's going to be. But when he sees it, he'll know it was me. And he'll give me such a beating. He loves that gun cabinet of his. I don't know what to say. I can see Martie is really fretting about having shattered his dad's rifle cabinet. Surely he can understand that mistakes invariably happen. I try efficaciously to change the subject. We did something good today, I say, with an upbeat tone in my voice. We rescued the turtles. We saved their little lives. Dad's planting corn today, and Mum told me yesterday she'd make some homemade lemonade, tunnel fudge cake, and grasshopper brownies for tea. If we go back to the kitchen now, we can even lick the bowls clean, if we get back home in time. Martie's face lifts, but then before we get up to leave to return to my house, who should come bounding through the woodgrove towards us but Martie's father, and by the pugnacious look on his face, I realise he must have discovered the spidery break in his rifle cabinet. He's as mad as hell. "Martie," he yells, "what the hell have you done to my gun cabinet, boy? What have you done to it? I am furious. How dare you break my gun cabinet? You know what it means to me. I can't believe you've gone and broken it like this." Martie is trembling. His face has grown so pale, so bleached, that the colour has literally leapt off his skin. He looks washed out. His eyes are as round as teacups. They're so terrified. They seem to sparkle brighter, as if tears are building up in his tear ducts and threatening to spill, while his knees are shaking so very much. I'm not sure that his legs are going to hold his body up for much longer. "I'm sorry, Dad," he spouts. "It was a dreadful accident. I really didn't mean to break it. I promise you I didn't. I would have told you, but I was scared you were going to get angry. I knew you'd be upset. I was scared. I'm sorry, Daddy." "An accident," spouts his father. "An accident. How very convenient. Everything is always an accident with you and your bloody mother." "It was, Dad. I promise," says Martie, a lone tear now spilling down his cheeks. It really was. I didn't mean to do it. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. You didn't mean to do it, really? I don't believe it for a moment. Hogwash, absolute hogwash. You and your mother, you're always talking hogwash. I'm watching the scene unfold before my eyes. It's not a pretty picture. Martie's father seems so big, so intimidating, so incredibly hostile, fierce, captious. Martie looks small by contrast, lost and tiny, like one of the vulnerable half-dollar turtles we rescued earlier on in the day. No wonder Martie was so keen to rescue them. He was sensitively empathetic to their desperate plight and vulnerability, for in one of them he sees himself. It is then that Martie's father does something that shocks me to my core. He pulls the belt out of his trouser pants. He's about to lash his son with his leather belt, which has a large metal buckle attached to it, when I try my level best to stop him. I can't possibly sit back and watch Martie being hurt by this belligerent bully. "Please, sir," I spout. "Please, please, I beg you, don't hit Martie. You heard him. He told you he's sorry about your gun cabinet. He really is. He didn't mean to hit it with the tennis ball. I can give you my pocket money, sir, so that you can get the glass fixed. I've saved up a lot of my own money, you know."
"What is this I hear, Martie? It's worse than I imagined. You went into my office. You were playing with a tennis ball in there. You're asking for trouble. How dare you do that?" shrieks Martie's father. My words seem to have only added fuel to the fire, accentuating the objectionable, obnoxious, invidious madness that rises out of Martie's father's mouth like the head of a serpent. Furiously he grabs Martie. He begins to lash his son's backside so viciously hard that the belt is puncturing Martie's skin beneath, for an arch of blood spatters on the back of his shirt. Martie is crying out in agonizing pain. The leather belt comes down violently hard on his back again and again. Martie cries out in horror, "Please, Daddy! Please stop! Please stop! You're hurting me!" I burst into tears. I can't help myself. They come rolling down my cheeks in streams like heavy rain showers that can't be abated or even calmed down. I'm visibly upset, exceedingly distressed to see my very best friend being so savagely and brutally hurt. "Please stop hurting Martie, sir. Please. He really didn't mean anything by what he did. It was an accident. Please, sir, don't hurt him." I can only watch helplessly as Martie's father continues to thrash his son and again, while Martie is shrieking out in pain. But all of a sudden, an extraordinary thing happens. In a trice, from out of the trees, a huge black silhouette comes darting towards us, pouncing upon Martie's father, pulling him away from Martie with a forceful fling, so that Martie's father goes toppling down onto the ground. His eyes are as round as saucers, as fear comes charging into his eyes. The 6-foot bully is now shaking like a leaf. It's his turn to be afraid. But what is this strange idiosyncratic creature, the likes of which I have never seen or discerned before? For a moment it is as if time stands still, as everything is so surreal. It feels like we're caught up in a very peculiar dream. I can see that this creature is about 7 foot tall, with long dark hair, the colour of black ink, but it is silky and smooth like human hair. The creature is so powerfully strong, majestic, lofty, dignified, but she looks remarkably human. She has large pillowy breasts and a full pregnant stomach. She is so heavily pregnant, as if she's days away from giving birth. I can see she's so furious with Martie's father, so incensed that her fury is palpable. She pulls the terrified man off the ground with her powerful arms, glaring at him through her deep-set dark eyes. Her mouth pulls back away from her teeth, so that she's snarling at Mr. Butcher,
Her nostrils flare. She shakes him violently hard. Martie's father is screaming indignantly, but the creature takes absolutely no notice whatsoever.
Martie, do something! Do something, Martie! Help me, Martie! Don't just stand there!
But me and Martie watch in silence as the creature picks up Martie's father, tossing him up and down in the air several times, catching him like a ball before he plunges to the ground. I can see she wants him to suffer, to experience the level of fear and trepidation that he has subjected Martie to all these years. Then she stamps her foot on his head when he's reached the ground, crushing it like an egg. There is nothing left of Mr. Butcher's face or head, as all the gunge from his head, along with the brain matter, come seeping out of his skull like the yolk from a chicken's egg. This incredulous creature rushes over to Martie, gathering him up in her arms. She pats his back gently. She does the same to me. She wraps us up in her warm, congenial energy, and she smells so nice. All these years later, I wonder what that smell was, but it reminds me of lilacs. The creature looks at us through dark, congenial eyes that are so incredibly kind. I can hear her say in my head, "Everything's going to be all right now. He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." She nods at us cordially, and then she glides away and is gone. Martie and I are staring at each other. We are gobsmacked. We're experiencing what I can only describe as delayed shock. We can't believe what has just transpired. We are stunned by what we have seen. What was that strange creature? What was she? Why was she covered in hair? But why? Why did she look so human? "Dad's dead," says Martie. "We better go back to my place. We need to show Mum his body. She'll know what we should do." "Can't we just leave him here?" I suggest. "Maybe the coyotes will get him and eat him up." "I don't think we should tell anyone what happened. I don't think they'll even believe us if we did." Martie hesitates. "No, we need to call my mother," he says in a matter-of-fact voice. It's like he's thinking on autopilot. Perhaps in the back of Martie's mind, he knew ultimately that this day would come, a day he'd fantasized about for so long, a day when he or his mother would have had enough and fortuitously killed his father in that pressure cooker moment when they couldn't take the abuse that they had suffered a moment longer. I follow Martie through the woods, which fringe both of our farms, filled namely with oaks and hickories, but occasionally you find the odd pecan nut tree, pines, maples, silvery elms, beech, serviceberry trees, and from time to time even a pawpaw tree. There's still a wind blowing. The trees stand up proud and tall into the galaxy like congenial giants. It's almost as if they appear to be whispering to each other excitedly among themselves, for they are the witnesses that have seen with hundreds of eyes what has just transpired only moments before. Martie's father lies on the forest floor, with a head now reduced to a mushy pulp. As I walk through the woods, my boots crunching the forest debris beneath rubber soles, with that crunching, popping sound, neither Martie nor I say a single word to each other, as in this poignant moment, all thoughts are confiscated from us. Finally we leave the woods. We walk towards the old wary farmhouse that seems to be sighing in the morning sun, groaning from the heaviness of a life conducted within its walls, as if it's been a witness to the blemishes of far too much discord and volatility for far too long. We walk into the kitchen, and I can see the thin, frail form of Martie's mother sponging down the black and white tiled floor on her knees with a bucket. She looks up at Martie in surprise, especially seeing me trailing behind him. "Everything all right, Martie?" she asks. "You're looking a little bit pale." "Dad's dead," he blurts out. "A big hairy lady killed him in the woods." He proceeds to tell his mother the incongruous, rather incredulous story that sounds so outrageous, even I don't believe him. But I was there, and I know it's true. It did happen. But it just sounds so far-fetched, so spurious to be true. It is then that I realise by the frightened look in Martie's mother's eyes that his mother rarely believes Martie was the one who killed his father, with my help, and is blaming his father's death on a crazy fairy tale that he's conjured up in order to distance himself from the grievous deed. She takes Martie lovingly in her arms, holding him as tightly as she can to her chest for a moment, tighter than she ever has before, as if she never ever wants to let her precious, most treasured son go. I see a mixture of relief and disquiet on her face, relief that the man she's despised for so long has finally gone, who is a husband to her by name alone, and will thankfully never ever be returning home again. But nervous trepidation about what on earth she's to do in this current situation. She is thinking quickly on her feet with a prudent practicality and sagacious common sense that demands her swift attention. Martie's mother becomes the voice of pragmatic reason. "Right," she says, wiping her hands dry on her red and white checkered apron. "I need you to get 3 trowels from your dad's shed, Martie, at once. Now, boys, this is very, very important. No one must ever know what we're about to do now. Do you understand that? This is terribly, terribly important," she says, looking at us both sternly. "You, Cameron, cannot breathe a word about this to your parents. I mean, you wouldn't want to get into trouble with them, would you? No one would understand what happened here today. No one would ever understand that. They could never comprehend the viciousness of your father, what a duplicitous, evil man he was. We were the only witnesses to his duplicity. The law would take your fictitious story with a pinch of salt, Martie, and they definitely wouldn't believe a word of what you said about a hairy woman that you claim killed your dad. It sounds ridiculously implausible." "But, Mum, I promise you it's true. Ask Cameron. He'll tell you. I didn't make the story up. There really was a hairy lady." "It's true. I promise you, Mrs. Butcher." But she emphatically does not believe the both of us. Martie's mother runs her hand across her mouth, as if wiping away imaginary breadcrumbs from her face. "Look, boys, I'm glad he's dead. Your father was not a good person. But the law, as I keep telling you, will never see it this way. They'll view it as murder. We could all go down for this, be locked away in prison for years and years, and never ever see the light of day. Which is why you boys cannot breathe a word about this. I can't stress this enough. In a month's time I will report your father missing. I'll say we had a fight, he stormed off in a huff, and said he never wanted to see us again. I want you boys to cooperate and say that you heard that altercation going on between the two of us." We all nod. We all gather trowels and walk into the woodgrove together. When Martie's mother sees her dead husband's corpse and the mashed head, she audibly gasps. She's physically shocked. It's not a sight for the faint of heart, or the more sensitively inclined. I think she firmly believes we jumped on his head hundreds of times, as such was the level of our hatred towards him. Once again she grabs Martie, kissing him lovingly on the hair. "I had no idea, darling, that you hated him this much. I'm so sorry, Martie. I know we should have got away from him, so that it didn't have to come to this." Martie bursts into tears. His mother cradles him lovingly in her arms, rocking him backwards and forwards, tears spilling down her cheeks. There. It's all going to be all right, I promise. He's gone now. Your father's never coming back. We don't ever have to live in fear again." We search the woodgrove for the very best place to bury the body. We find a perfect spot under a young oak tree. This is the best place, Martie's mother informs us. This oak tree will become so big one day, its roots will eventually completely devour and obliterate the corpse, and maybe all the bones minerals it offers up to the earth. I certainly like the idea of Martie's father's body offering sustenance to this oak tree, as even if he never did good things in life, at least his body will do something good in death to the land. I don't know how long it took us to dig a grave, but Martie's mother wants it to be extremely deep, and so it takes us many long hours. I did go home briefly to inform my mother that I was spending the day with Martie. "About time, too," says my mother. "Martie's always having lunch with us, isn't he? I'm glad they finally had the decency to invite you over for lunch for a change. You can take some grasshopper brownies over with you if you like. They're fresh from the oven." I take a box of brownies, along with a bottle of lemonade, and put it down in Martie's mother's kitchen. But we don't even stop for snacks. We finish digging. After the hole is big enough, we roll Martie's father into the grave. His body lands into the hole with a mighty plop. Even the earth seems to groan in receiving him into its bowels. Then we lay all the dirt on top of Martie's father, and with our feet we stamp the ground to make it as flat as we possibly can. Then we spread out the excess soil all over the place. Martie's mother digs up a couple of young ferns that she finds on the forest floor, replanting them over the grave. We collect twigs and debris to cover the grave so that the ground looks undisturbed. By the end of the job, we look so incredibly filthy that Martie's mother suggests I come back to the house for a bath, as my parents will surely wonder how on earth I got so badly soiled. By the time we return to Martie's mother's farmhouse, we are completely shattered, dog-eared tired. I stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I can see why I need a bath. I certainly look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, as there are muddy smears all over my face. The next few days go seamlessly, and I alternate with spending much time between Martie's house and my own. Even my mother is thrilled to see that I'm being regularly invited over to the neighbours more frequently. True to my word, I never breathe a word to my parents about Martie's father's fortuitous death, and the strange incongruous creature we encountered that day. I came to the realization that doing such a foolish thing would be inviting trouble. My parents would likely think I was making up fictitious stories, but Martie and I talk continuously about the pregnant female hairy lady we encountered in the woods. I wonder if she's had her baby yet, Martie, I say. She looked like she was about to pop, didn't she? I nod. I wonder what she was, I say, but she was ever so nice. I could see how furious she was with how your father was lashing out at you. She could see he was vicious. I was scared when your father was lashing you. It was like he enjoyed hurting you. I don't miss him, said Martie, as we sit by the creek throwing stones in the water. I don't miss him at all. I know that sounds horrible, but do you know, when I get up in the morning, I'm actually happy. So is my mother. She sings to herself all the time these days, and she bakes so many nice things now. She joined a cooking class. Don't tell your mother I told you this. I don't want to offend her. But my mother's grasshopper brownies are way better than your mother's. Really? I say, looking amazed. I never knew anyone could bake better grasshopper brownies than my mother. It's certainly true. Every time I'm having lunch at Martie's mother's home, I see the transformative, positive changes in everything around us. Even the house appears happier. It looks brighter and friendlier, as if a heavy oppressiveness has been lifted off its shoulders. I notice Martie's mother has recently had the house repainted, so the peeling paint that folded and curled down the walls in a way that made the house look dejected and unkempt has been scraped away. The house white walls gleam in the morning sun so brightly. They almost twinkle, and every smear on the windows has been wiped away, so that even the windows now sparkle, reflecting the sunlight, which they certainly never did before. Martie's mother has put down on the ground a brand new welcome mat that is elegantly parked in pride of place outside her front door. She's replanted the terracotta pots with bright pink hanging geraniums. There are even climbing roses growing outside the recently newly painted front door that has been painted a bright red colour, which Martie's mother says she heard is a very auspicious colour that invites good luck into your home. Everything changes in our lives so dramatically, as Martie's mother looks so much happier these days. She's even picked up a few pounds. Her emaciated cheeks are no longer sunken and hollow. Her blue eyes sparkle. She's confident, radiant, rather pretty after she had her hair done at the local hairdresser's in town more recently. The cut is really rather stylish. Even the old house appears cleaner, brighter, and more loved, as if Martie's mother has injected more energy into the place. There are flowers dangling out of vases, and the smell of freshly baked cinnamon wafting around the home, inviting stomachs to be stirred into hunger, and noses to enjoy the infusive, homely smells the bread so graciously affords. It seems like Martie's mother's cooking classes have paid off in leaps and bounds. She's selling her homemade cakes, candies and lemonades in town at the local grocer's, in the section labelled Baked Goods, and they're selling like hotcakes. Even the black Labrador has a brand new bright pink collar, despite the fact he's a boy. But Martie's mother insists on pink, as it means that life is good. He thumps his tail much more these days, clearly delighting in the fact that Martie's father is no longer around. He wasn't always a bad man. Isabel, Martie's mother, tells me. I wouldn't have married him otherwise, she said, wiping the crumbs from her mouth. But why, Mrs. Butcher, did he get so angry? That's a very good question, Cameron, of which I can't answer, but I think it could stem from his childhood. It would seem his father used to beat him up and his brothers with a strapping leather belt. He abused his own mother, so she disappeared one day, never to be seen again. My husband woke up one morning to find his father behaving very strangely. He was smoking a cigar and told all three of his children, "Your mother's gone away. She's never coming back, boys, so get used to it." As you can imagine, back then, Paul, he was only a young boy at the time. He asked his father why his mother had abandoned them all. It made him feel very distressed. You can imagine what that does to a young boy. "It's none of your business, son," his father had snapped. So Paul told me, as this young 10-year-old boy, he watched his father dig a big pond in the backyard soon after his mother vanished. He'd never shown any interest in building a pond before, so all three children believed their mother's remains were lying there under the pond, but they could never be sure about that. It was very convenient that after the previous evening, when his parents had had a blazing row together, his mother just suddenly vanishes into thin air. The kids knew that she would never willingly leave them. Needless to say, their mother was never found or heard from again. But I think Paul's anger could have stemmed from that event. He swore he'd never become like his hateful father. But he did. A duplicate copy of his old man, in fact. You know the saying, like father, like son. It's certainly apt in this case. Just as Mrs. Butcher had promised, a month after her husband Paul's death, she called the sheriff to inform him that Mr. Butcher, her husband, was a missing person. I was playing with Martie at the house when the sheriff arrived at Moonlight Ridge in his police vehicle. I'd always liked him. He had recently got divorced from his own wife. "Good morning, Mrs. Butcher," he said, lifting off his cowboy hat from his head, full of black buoyant curls. "You called me." "That's right, I did," she says, giving us a wink. "Would you like some tea, Sheriff, and some grasshopper brownies?" "Sheriff, my mother makes the best grasshopper brownies you've ever tasted," pipes Martie enthusiastically. "I believe so. I've heard all about your mother's fabulous cooking in town. I must try some of these brownies. How can I refuse such a cordial invitation?" Before long, the sheriff is sitting around the kitchen table, while Mrs. Butcher is preparing tea in a flowery china teapot. She pours the sheriff a cup of tea, while she pours me and Martie some homemade ginger ale in glass tumblers. Martie is watching the sheriff eagerly as he takes a bite of his mother's grasshopper brownies. The sheriff smacks his lips appreciatively. "Are they not the best brownies you've ever tasted, Sheriff?" says Martie, his eyes gleaming. I realise he's become so proud of his mother's excellent cooking. "Oh, they're absolutely delicious. I hope you don't mind me having another one. Well, what is all this about, Isabella?" asked the sheriff. "It's my husband. We had a row a month ago. He walked out on me, Sheriff. He said he was never ever coming back. I thought he would return, once he'd finally cooled down. He got very explosive, Sheriff. He had a temper on him. But he hasn't returned. I contacted his father, but he hasn't heard a bean from his son, nor have his brothers, which is highly unusual, I gather." "I see," says the sheriff, taking another sip of tea and a bite of his brownie. He pulls out a white paper pad from his top pocket and proceeds to take some notes down. "When did your husband storm out of the house? Can you remember?" "It was the first day of spring, I believe, Sheriff." "Oh, I see. Well, I notice he didn't take his car with him." "No, Sheriff. I suspect he hitchhiked. He'd been drinking that night, so driving was impossible. It was out of the question for him. But he wanted out." "Well, at least he was being responsible, I suppose," says the sheriff. "But hitchhiking is not without its risks. Why, only recently there was a case of a hitchhiker being stabbed by a man who gave him a lift. It was all over the papers, if I'm not mistaken." It is odd, Sheriff, for him not to return home. I think something nefarious may have happened to him. It's not like him to have a grudge for so long."
"Do you remember what the fight was about?"
"Yes, I do, Sheriff," says Martie suddenly. "You see, Sheriff, I was playing with my tennis ball in my father's office. He was very angry with me for breaking the glass. He was hitting me with a leather belt. Mum was very upset with him, telling him he shouldn't be hurting me like that." "That's right, Sheriff. I'm going to come clean with you. I'm afraid my husband was not a good man at all. He was always beating up poor Martie." "And he beat up Mum too, Sheriff. So I hope he never ever comes back."
"Well, if he does return, Isabella, my advice to you is to get a divorce. I know it's not commonplace nowadays, and it's frowned upon, but I divorced my wife. She cheated on me, you know."
"I heard, Sheriff. I'm sorry," said my mother, reaching out to comfort him. "I was certain I'd picked up some chemistry between the two of them, but I wasn't certain about that." Of course, as was to be expected, Mr. Butcher's absence around our town was duly noted by everyone. Rumours abounded, gossip was rife. Mr. Butcher had had a blazing row with his wife and stormed out of the house, claiming he was never ever coming back. It appeared he had been true to his word. I, for one, was very happy about that, said my mother over the dinner table one night. No one around here liked that obnoxious, rude man. He was a nasty, nasty piece of work. My mother wipes her lip with her napkin. You know, Isabella was such a quiet, self-effacing character when that man was around, always disappearing into the shadows. But ever since her god-awful husband left, she's come out of her shell, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. I didn't realise what a charming woman she was. And as for Martie, I've noticed he's so much more upbeat these days, a much happier child. What do you think, Cameron? Asks my mother. I think he's much happier. He never did like his dad. My mother takes a bite of her chicken pie, looking reflective. Oh, I do hope he's gone for good, that he's never coming back. I do worry what will happen if he returns home one day. I worry that Isabella will shrink back into her shell. I don't think she'd ever have the guts to divorce him. More's the pity. Men like that don't deserve to have such a good wife. My father takes a sip of his beer, puts it down on the oakwood table.
I was speaking to the sheriff today, he said. He was talking about that recent case where the hitchhiker was attacked by the man who picked him up. He had a lucky escape, but maybe Martie's father was picked up by the very same man, for all we know, and he could be lying dead in a shallow grave somewhere. I almost choke on my chicken pie. My dad's words are bang on the money. But let's just say the grave in question is not quite so shallow. Talking about Sheriff Montrose, said my mother, isn't it appalling what happened to him with that wife of his? Cheating on him like that, and in his own bed at home for that matter. I gather he returned home a little earlier to find his wife in bed with the carpenter that they'd hired to put in a brand new kitchen. That woman has no shame. She's always going around town flashing her eyelashes at every man she sees. Mrs. Cotton believes she slept with the postman as well. She noticed he delivered a parcel to her house about 3 months back, and remained in that house a tad too long. Came out at the front door adjusting his flies. Mrs. Cotton said when she saw him, he flushed all red and began to scurry off to the other houses, looking as sheepish as ever. That's awful, said my father. I think the term to use for her is loose woman. Wouldn't it be wonderful, says my mother, if the sheriff and Isabella got together? They'd make a fine couple, you know. I think Sheriff Montrose really does like Isabella, I say. I saw the way he looked at her when Mrs. Butcher was filing her missing persons report. It would be cool for Martie to have a sheriff as a stepfather, don't you think? Well, we can only hope that if the god-awful piranha ever returns home, that Isabella has the guts to ask him for a divorce, says my father. I don't think he's ever coming back, I say. Well, I hope you're right about that, Cameron. We can only wait and see. It was on a late Friday afternoon, 6 weeks after Martie's father had been killed by the pregnant hairy lady, when Martie and I were playing around in the woodgrove. It was going to be cowboys and Indians, but we had to eliminate the cowboys. We both wanted to be Indian chiefs. My mother had bought us each our own magnificent Indian headdress to wear,
made out of eagle's feathers. So we decided to make up a game called Indians and Indians. We would be rival Indian chiefs at war with each other. It was a quiet, warm day. The forest was cool, as the pretty streams of sunlight danced through the canopy, brushing the foliage with soft shafts of twinkling light. I loved how green the forest looked. It was strewn with beautiful viridescent mosses, ferns, interesting funguses, like little golden umbrellas, clinging to the barks of trees. There were woodland wildflowers and pretty shrubs, as well as a plethora of old leaves and twigs that were becoming like mulch on the dark earthen floor, that really was richly fertile. As we were playing our games together, the bird song that filtered through the valley suddenly stilled, almost as if the needle on a record player had just stopped spinning round. It was a little strange as everything became silent. And that was when we saw her. It was the tall, hairy lady who had killed Martie's father. She came towards us, very proudly, with a baby sitting across her shoulders, playing with her hair. I just remember staring at her. I thought she was so magnificent. She was human-looking, big of course, but she exuded an incredible grace as she almost floated towards us. She had a profound, noble quality about her, which is very hard to explain to you. She points to her flat stomach, which I have to say was so muscular and taut it was almost impossible to believe she ever carried a baby. And then she points to the baby, and her energy is of an excited mother who simply can't wait to show off her sprog to us. She walks over to me, pats my back as if we're long-lost friends. She removes the baby from her shoulder and places it in my arms. At this point in its development, it's the size of a small monkey and less human-like than its mother in appearance, as it's covered in dark hair, but it has a similar face to hers and the same deep-set dark eyes that are sparkling with mischief. The critter is playing with my Indian headdress, simply marvelling at the feathers. The mother is chatting away at us garrulously, in an eloquent foreign language which we don't understand at all. But it's a language filled with a lot of clicks. The creature, when she talks, is exceedingly expressive, and when she talks about the birth of her baby, she actually mimes the entire event for us. She's quite the actress. She puts a pained expression upon her face, holds her stomach tightly, pants, expressing the level of pain she went through during birth. She makes a few groaning sounds. I get the words in my head. Hard, painful delivery, but worth it, really worth it. I think those were her words, as they entered my head in a way that is contrary to my own thoughts. It is then Martie's turn to hold the baby in his arms. I notice his eyes light up like Christmas lights. He's staring at the little creature in awe. I immediately sense that the two of them just connect together. The little creature pulls out a feather from Martie's headdress and makes a delighted chuckling sound in the back of his throat. The mother says something like, "Kra, kla." It's as if she's telling her little sprog that he mustn't play with the headdress, but Martie doesn't appear to mind at all. He's bobbing the Bigfoot up and down on his hips, and the little infant is making delighted squeaks. It then jumps directly off Martie's shoulders onto its mother's and begins to settle there. The mother's attention is directed towards Martie's Indian headdress. She's examining it curiously, making appreciative "ah" sounds. I hear the words in my head. Powerful energy, these feathers. Powerful. Very powerful. To my amazement, Martie takes the Indian headdress off his head and hands it to the hairy lady. "For you," he says. "I want you to keep it. I can't thank you enough for getting rid of my dad for me. It's my way of saying thank you." I couldn't believe Martie was handing the creature his headdress. When my mother gave it to him, he had told her it was one of the best presents he'd ever received in his entire life, but he was selflessly giving it to the hairy lady. Of course I knew why. For without his obnoxious father around, Martie's life was free. He was able to live a full, wonderful life, the life he deserved, without his father robbing his childhood of joy, which now he could experience to the fullest. The female Bigfoot studied the eagle feathers with a fervent delight. She nods her head at us, and we hear the words in our heads. "I will always treasure this. Thank you so much." And she glides away with the baby waving its arms at us as if it's saying bye. "You gave her your Indian headdress," I say. "You really loved it." "She deserves it," said Martie. It was common knowledge in the town that Isabella and the sheriff were now an item. No one begrudged them any happiness. They were both victims of less than desirable former spouses. One day when I was playing at Mrs. Butcher's house, she calls us both into the kitchen, pouring us some ice-cold lemonade, and then she makes Sheriff a cup of tea. He's picked up a few pounds since he's been dating Isabella. He's got chubbier cheeks now that rather remind me of a hamster's. He doesn't hesitate to dive into a large slice of pink champagne cake. "We've got something very exciting to tell you both," says Mrs. Butcher, smiling at us with a huge grin. "Me and the Sheriff, we're engaged." "So you're moving in with us, Sheriff?" said Martie, his eyes lighting up with delight.
Something like that, Martie. If you'll have me, of course.
To cut a long story short, the Sheriff and Isabella got married in church before the eyes of God. But it was only 7 years later, when Martie's father was declared by the courts as missing, presumed dead, that her former marriage to Paul was finally dissolved. The Sheriff and Isabella were now legally married in the eyes of the law. The Sheriff became an amazing father to Martie, and the rest of his childhood was exceedingly happy. The Sheriff taught me and Martie how to hunt. Martie and I, all these years later, remain the very best of friends, but we have never forgotten the female hairy lady we encountered, that we now know is a Bigfoot, that changed Martie's life forever and gave him and his mother their lives back. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I give the taxi driver my address as I climb into the back seat of his taxi cab at JFK International Airport, which is about a 20-minute drive to my fiancé's illustrious apartment building in Astoria, Queens, in New York. There is actually a closer airport, which is approximately 4 miles away from our apartment, but I avoid it like the plague. I don't like LaGuardia Airport, nor the surrounding area. It's not very savoury, and LaGuardia is my least favourite airport. For a start, it has overcrowded check-ins. There's no room at the gate while you're connecting for another flight. It's dirty, cramped, poorly lit, and nothing is ever running on time. I would so much rather take the 20-minute journey home from JFK Airport, although let's not kid. If the traffic is congested or bad, it can take twice as long for me to get home. But I don't care. I feel significantly safer coming home this route any day of the week. The taxi driver is from Bangladesh in India. He's wearing a white turban on his head. He has an interesting face with a deep complexion, the colour of a warm hazelnut. He's very talkative. I doubt anyone can get into his taxi without him embracing them with a lot of chatter, rather like an ebullient colourful parrot in a cage that simply won't shut up. I can see this friendly man lives to talk, quite a garrulous character actually, a warm, friendly, likeable soul that you instantly can't help but like. Personally, I'm not talkative, nor am I exactly shy. In truth, I'm more of a listener than a talker, the kind of person that eminently prefers to listen rather than talk. All my life I've been imprudently accused of being bashfully reticent, fallaciously branded as painfully shy, which is not true at all. Even in my school reports, when I was a young girl, I was always unfortunately reproached and denunciated for not interacting with other kids at school, being self-effacing, withdrawn, reserved, exceedingly distant. I could never comprehend those unfounded, erroneous implications directed at me, as I got actively involved in games and sports, but never spoke much. But that absolutely did not mean I was timorous in the least. I enjoy people-watching, I guess, observing human behaviour, but talking has always been overrated to me. I guess I just prefer not to talk, but it's more of a choice or a preference rather than anything else. But no one ever gets that, not even my fiancé Logan. Suffice to say, even my parents falsely conjecture that I'm reclusively shy, and they raised me, so I guess there's no hope of my persuading them to presume otherwise. I will agree I am contained. I never wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm a reluctant, circumspect talker. So right now in this taxi cab, the last thing I want to do is talk. I'm exhausted from my flight. I'm returning home 3 days earlier from a business trip. As all the meetings were finalised, and the decisions about the product purchases from kitchen appliances, cabinets and ovens and so forth were completed in record time for the company, which I'm exceedingly pleased about. I've been away for a week. It was supposed to be 1.5 weeks, but everything was completed efficiently, in half the time. I can't wait to surprise my fiancé. I've never disclosed to him that I was returning home early. I've missed him so much. We're getting married next June. We've already booked the venue at the Plaza Hotel, even paid the deposit for our wedding beforehand to secure the date. I've had the wedding invitations completed and designed on black card with gold writing and gold leaves printed on the card. They look absolutely gorgeous, even if I say so myself. Next week I'll be sending them out to our guests. As I sit on the rather vulgar mustard-colour back seats of a taxi cab that deceptively look like they're leather, but they're definitely not. They're a cheap plastic-like copy. You can even feel it. I sigh as my body sinks back gratefully in the seats. The taxi smells unpleasantly of stale cigarette smoke and human sweat. I loathe that smell. There's a miniature black and white dappled dairy cow dangling from the rear-view mirror. I can see the sparkling brown eyes of the taxi driver as he surveys me through that mirror as he drives. He looks inquisitively curious about me, which does surprise me rather. Doesn't he get sick and tired of the throngs of people he must pick up day after day? If the boot were on the other foot, I would never exchange any words with my clients, other than a mandatory mumble here and there for yes or no. So you from Queens? Nice area to live, if I may say so. I think where I come from in Bangladesh, the people could only dream of living in such an ostentatious area. That's why I came to America, to escape the poverty, to find good work. He pauses for a moment. I send money home to the rest of my family. Luckily, the dollar can afford them a good life, a better life. It makes me feel accomplished to be able to help. I don't think we realize how good we have it here in America. The privileges we have, the opportunities. Well, it can't be easy for you, I say empathetically. Your family members so far away from you, I mean. You must miss home dreadfully. I can't imagine how I'd feel being so far from my homeland. I miss the people. A place is always about the people, is it not? The life, no. It's very hard there. Living condition, not good. So many people, so much poverty. Of course, it's in your face wherever you go. You see it in the scruffy street kids. You can't ignore it or pretend it's not there. You have to accept poverty when it stares you blatantly in the face like a cruel joke. You have to turn the begging street kids away. Learn to say no. You can't help everyone, can you? That's very hard, especially hard to accept here in America. If someone tells you they're hungry, you can give them a helping hand. But when hundreds of street kids beg you for food, you're not in a position to help everyone. You just can't. Well, it isn't easy, I say, but at least you're helping your family out there, helping a little, and that's what matters, no matter how minuscule. I'm sure they're exceedingly grateful to you. What about your cow, I say to him, the one you have hanging over your mirror there? Is the cow sacred to you and your religion? I think I've heard that somewhere before. Oh, yes, I'm a Hindu, you see. The cow for us is symbolic of Mother Earth, representing the Divine Mother. We even sell distilled cow urine in my part of the world. It's considered a precious commodity. It's highly sought after, but not easy to attain. The quintessential liquid gold, we believe in our culture that everything to do with the cow is purifying, even the dung. My sister in Bangladesh, for example, every time she has a cold, she swears that she went to drink the cow urine. The next day the cold had completely gone. Couldn't that just be a case of mind over matter? I mean, if your sister really believes the cow urine will heal her, then surely it's just psychosomatic. I think our bodies can heal themselves, if we believe that with a conviction. Well, I've never taken cow urine myself, but I get where you're coming from. The mind is a great healer. Ah, says the taxi driver happily. Traffic wasn't too bad today. You're almost home now. He drives through the ornate black wrought iron gates of the apartment block, with its pristinely manicured hedges, ornate Italianite fountain, very smart formal flower beds. He parks his car in the parking lot, under the shade of a mature oak tree. He eagerly climbs out of the car with a rather enthusiastic swagger, opening the trunk to retrieve my large yellow suitcase for me, which he pulls out of the trunk with one large heave and hands directly to me. I thank him, pay him for the taxi ride, giving him a generous tip. He thanks me, gets back into his taxi, and drives away, giving me a friendly hoot as he leaves. I make my way through the lobby, wheeling my suitcase behind me, past Paul, the concierge, who nods at me politely. Paul has been the concierge here at the apartment block forever and a day. I think he's my kindred spirit in a manner of speaking, as he barely ever says a word, but watches people like I do. I don't extrapolate that he's actually shy. I think he's congruent like me in this regard. An enigmatic, quiet person, misunderstood, and falsely assumed to be shy. I walk to the lifts and press the button to the 3rd floor. The lift rolls up, making that whirling sound, and the door of the lift opens wide. I take a deep, reassuring breath. I'm almost home. I'm minutes away from being reunited with my fiancé. I can't wait. I've got anticipatory butterflies flapping away excitedly in my stomach. I glance at the time on my cell phone, which I pull out from the back of my jacket pocket. It's 5 o'clock. My heart sinks. I realise my fiancé is probably not home from his office in Lower Manhattan. Damn, I think. I should have checked his parking space to see if his truck was actually parked there yet. It's too late for that. I can't see the parking bay from the 3rd floor. I could always hide in the apartment and boo him when he comes back home, I think, grinning to myself, as I envisaged the shock reaction on my fiancé's face when I emerged miraculously from behind a sofa to give him the fright of his life. I think quickly on my feet. If he's not home yet, I'll be needing my apartment key. I quickly open my purse to retrieve my key for apartment number 32. Then, with the leather keyring dangling in my hand, with a selection of keys jiggling, I roll my suitcase on its tiny wheels forward down the long tiled passageway. To my amazement, there's a debonair-looking man. Well dressed, he's sporting a pair of smart fashionable khaki pants, a white polo shirt tucked inside, a zooty pair of leather boots. He's sitting on the tiled floor of the passageway, perching his back against the red brick wall of my fiancé's apartment, with his hands clasping big bunches of thick, dark black hair between his fingers, while his head is cradled in his knees, with that forlorn, exasperated kind of defeated posture that propounds that all is not well in his world. Who the hell is that? And why is he sitting directly outside my fiancé's apartment wall? If he's from this apartment block, why can't he find somewhere else to sit, like outside the wall of his own apartment, for goodness sake? But not ours. Who does he think he is? Perhaps he's had a blowout with a wife or girlfriend, I think, and has chosen to plop his body inconveniently outside our apartment. Could he not have chosen a more appropriate spot than to sit so conspicuously against my fiancé's brick wall? Bloody cheek, I think to myself. I stand there for a moment, wondering what on earth I should do, and then I roll my suitcase ever forward, wilfully choosing to ignore him, as I move towards the white wooden door with the gold number above the knocker that reads number 32. I can feel the stranger's eyes fixed directly on me, and I involuntarily turn around to look at him. His large blue eyes meet mine. He holds my gaze for a moment. Feeling slightly uncomfortable and shifting awkwardly on my feet, I quickly look away as I thrust my key directly in the lock. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you," he says, sounding sombre, a note of warning in his voice that commandeers my heedfulness. "Your fiancé's in there with my girlfriend. They're having—" He pauses for a moment, flushing bright red, almost embarrassed to say the words. "A rollick in the hay, might be the polite way to put it." The man's words hit me like a cold slap across the face. "You're wrong, I say. My fiancé would never ever cheat on me. You must be grievously mistaken. I'm getting married soon." "Your fiancé's name is Logan O'Brien. Am I not right in saying so?" "That's right," I say, looking gobsmacked. "How could you possibly even know my fiancé's name?" "Well, I thought I recognised you. You're engaged to Logan O'Brien. My girlfriend is his secretary. She works for him. Well, I hate to tell you this, but your fiancé, Logan O'Brien, is in there right now. He's hooked up with my girlfriend, his so-called secretary,
I saw them walking into that apartment 20 minutes ago, holding hands. I've been following them around all day today. I suspected a while ago that my girlfriend was cheating on me, but today my suspicions have been affirmed. He passes me his cell phone and shows me a photograph. Take a look at that. This picture I took earlier on today at a coffee shop in town. I clandestinely followed them back here. I think the photograph is very incriminating, don't you? Look at the lustful way they're looking at each other. It makes me sick to my stomach. It makes my blood boil. My girlfriend Teresa insists that Logan is just her boss. She's been lying through her teeth all along. And she's just his little secretary. But does that look just like a secretary to you? She's a whole lot more to him than just his secretary. I look at the picture. My blood runs cold. A blonde woman is looking directly into my fiancé's eyes. My fiancé has his arms around her so lovingly. I'm going to be violently sick. This isn't happening. I feel as if I'm playing a sleazy part on that television show Cheaters. I used to watch that show and think to myself, thank God that I would never ever have that happen to me. I have more sense than to get involved with the kind of man that would cheat on me. But it seems I got Logan all wrong. It is in that moment I hear a woman's happy screams, accompanied by my fiancé's voice. I realise that this is true. My fiancé is in our apartment with this man's girlfriend, and there's no need to guess what they're doing, judging by the euphoric cries I can hear coming from inside the apartment. They have no shame making such animalistic noises like that. If you didn't know any better, you'd think someone was shrieking out in terrible pain. The noises are so unsettlingly loud. Every time the woman shrieks out, "Oh my God!" I feel as if a sharp knife is being thrust violently into my guts. This can't be happening to me. It feels so surreal. I can feel the nausea rising up in the back of my throat. My stomach feels vacuously empty. The anger is rising up in my belly like the steam from a kettle. But unlike that steam, this does not evaporate. My indignance does not dissipate, for it is taking up permanent residency in my heart and is promptly refusing to budge. I want to storm into that apartment now, like a belligerent bull terrier. I want to pounce on my fiancé, tear him apart limb from limb, like a police dog refusing to remove its sharp teeth from a perpetrator's limb, by gripping it so tightly, without releasing or relinquishing its fearsome hold. My fiancé is that perpetrator. He's stolen my heart. He's thrown it to the wolves, as if it's no more valuable or precious than a sheep's kidneys bought from the local butcher's to feed a tabby cat. Even the taxi driver who dropped me off moments before knows better and has a hell of a lot more respect and reverence for cow urine than Logan actually has for me. Right now, I'd like nothing more in this entire world than to wipe the fat, smug smile off his conceited, puffed-up face and hurt him as hard as he is hurting me now. For in this moment, my world has come crashing down before me like a pack of cards, or like a building in the throes of demolition. This is not fair. My dreams and hopes are abandoned on the wind, like a delicate puffy dandelion seed sailing up into the ether above the fluffy white clouds. A subtle whispering nudge within me pulls me away from turning the key in the lock and letting myself into Logan's apartment, which is really what I want to do right now. Ostensibly, the pertinacious nudge tightens on me, tenaciously discouraging me from acting in haste and repenting at leisure. I would like nothing more than to go barging into the apartment and pull the cheap little floozy off my fiancé and tell him what a disgusting lower form of pond life he actually is. I'll be damned if Logan gets the quenching satisfaction of knowing he has hurt me. This would only feed his gluttonous ego, build up his self-esteem, which, believe me, needs no extra feeding. It's obese enough. If it gets any larger, it'll need some serious bariatric surgery to restrain it. He already believes he's God's gift to woman. I've always known that Logan has an ego on him, the size of Manhattan. It's one of the things about him I liked the least, from day one. I'd never enjoyed his obvious infatuation that he had with himself. He's always assured me it's good to have a great self-esteem, but not like this. Maybe it's better to pretend I don't give a damn about any of this.
That would hurt him a whole lot more. If there's anything I want to do, it is to hurt my fiancé right back, in exactly the same way he has hurt me. I feel so furious. I can't think straight, but my emotions are numb, yet my tear ducts remain dry. I'm simply refusing to cry. There's no way I'm going to shed a tear for Logan. He is so not worth crying over. He has made his bed, and now he can lie on it. We're engaged, for goodness sake. My wedding invitations are printed. The Plaza Hotel has already been booked. And he cheats on me. How could he do this to me? I feel deflated, humiliated, ashamed, terribly, terribly upset. But I've surprised myself. I haven't burst into floods of tears as I would have expected. Maybe I'm stronger and tougher than I actually think I am. I pull over my suitcase and slink down in a seated position right next to the stranger. It's my turn to emulate the stranger's posture by clasping my long dark hair in my hands and staring down at my knees. There is no doubt that misery loves company. It feels oddly reassuring that I'm not alone in my grief and despair. Someone else is feeling as bad as I do for the very same reason. This unlikely stranger feels as deflated as I do. We're both like two badly punctured beach balls that can never be repaired. The punctures are way too deep.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about all this, and that you had to find out like this. It can't be easy for you. About your fiancé, I mean.
Well, you're in exactly the same boat, I say. I'm sorry for you too.
It's all right for me. I've got my head around it. I've been suspecting this for a while, so I do have an advantage on you. You've only just learnt about your fiancé's treachery.
I mean, we're engaged to be married. I can't believe he's actually done this to me. I can't believe the nerve of it. I came back 3 days earlier to surprise him. Can you believe that? And he's in there with your girlfriend, for goodness sake. It makes me want to throw up. I feel like being violently sick. I'm as mad as hell. But you know what? I will be damned if he knows he's made me upset. He's as vain. I can't tell you how vain my boyfriend is. Well, my fiancé.
You're not kidding. I've seen it for myself. Your fiancé's got some ego on him. I've seen him around before. I always thought he was rather haughty and stuck up, if you don't mind my saying so.
He's always been full of himself, but there's no excuse for any of this.
No, there are absolutely no excuses for cheating, says the stranger. You know the saying, if they'll do it to you, they'll do it with you. I never get why people cheat on each other and haven't got the guts to end their relationships, for goodness sake. But hurting your partner like this is morally wrong. It's reprehensible. Sorry, forgive me. I haven't introduced myself. I'm awfully rude. I'm Stuart, by the way, he says, extending his hands to shake mine. He's got a firm, warm grip, unlike my fiancé, who always has a clammy, wet handshake. Maybe that in itself is revealing enough. I'm Natasha Fleming, I say. Very nice to meet you, Natasha. A shame we couldn't meet under better circumstances. But at least we know the true colours of our other halves. You're saved from getting married to that tow rag, and then the dreadful complications and nastiness of getting divorced further down the line. For sooner or later you would have discovered his infidelity. So finding out about it now has got to be a good thing. Divorce is never a pretty business.
What about you? How serious were you with your relationship with Teresa?
Well, I wouldn't have had a relationship with her if I wasn't serious. But obviously my relationship with Teresa is over now. That boat has now long since sailed. It shan't be mooring at my jetty in the foreseeable future ever again. It's completely banned from coming in my waters. At that moment, a young man delivering takeaways is walking towards my fiancé's apartment with takeaway bags in his hands. It appears the occupants of apartment number 32 have ordered takeaways, having worked up a considerable appetite beforehand. I'll be damned if they get their takeaways, the quintessential reward for their cheating behaviour. But Stuart is thinking faster than I am. Is that for apartment 32? Stuart asks the young man. He nods. We are apartment 32, he says, pulling out some cash from his wallet to pay for the food. The man hands us the takeaways,
and takes the cash. He scurries off.
"Are you hungry?" Stuart asks me, grinning cheekily.
I'm starving, I say, and even more so now that I know we can eat their takeaways. Clever thinking of you. At least we can deprive our cheating partners from receiving their food. We open the bag. We pull out the takeaway boxes, marked with Chinese logo. My heart sinks when I see that my partner, Logan, has ordered exactly the same Chinese menu that we order ourselves regularly from time to time, which seems so intimate, so personal. Once again the hurt and disdain is crawling in my guts, as if hundreds of crabs are scratching away at my insides. He's ordered what we personally would order together, with another woman. It's a big kick to the guts. Sweet and sour pork, Chinese chow mein, chicken fried rice, chicken spring rolls, and beef and oyster sauce. Stuart and I begin to eat the takeaways. We find ourselves to be surprisingly hungry. It feels good to be depriving the cheaters of their Chinese takeaways. Moments later, the door of number 32 is opened wide. My fiancé is standing in the doorway, wearing only his boxer shorts, with a blonde woman standing next to him. She's wearing a flimsy pink silky dressing gown, leaving very little to the imagination. Her blonde hair is standing up like a hedgehog. Her makeup is all smeared and running down her face.
"They said they delivered the takeaways,"
I hear Logan saying.
"There must be some misunderstanding. I don't see them here."
My fiancé's face pales when his eyes suddenly observe me and Stuart sitting next to each other outside the wall of his apartment, eating his Chinese takeaways. The expression on his face is completely befuddled. He looks like he's been caught with his pants down. He seems mortified, which gives me a measure of satisfaction.
Natasha, what are you doing there? I thought you were away."
You didn't you? Too bad I came back 3 days early. I see what you're getting up to. What a fabulously entertaining time you've been having here while I've been away. It looks like your secretary's been doing lots of outside work for you, beyond the office. Nice cosy arrangement you have going there, Logan. I hope it's worth it. I never want to see you ever again. I'm glad I've discovered what you're really like. It goes without saying that the wedding is off.
"Don't be like that, Natasha. We need to talk. We really need to talk. I was only having a bit of fun. She came on to me," he said, poking the girl in the pink dressing gown. "It meant nothing. She means nothing to me. It's you I love, Natasha. It's you I want."
Teresa, the blonde-haired girl, she looks absolutely furious. She starts slapping Logan indignantly. "What do you mean it meant nothing? How dare you, Logan? You said to me you loved me back in there. Or have you conveniently forgotten all about that?"
"Hello, Teresa," says Stuart. "Are you not going to apologise to me for cheating on me? Or are you going to tell me it was just an innocent bit of fun like Logan here?"
"Whatever. Sorry, Stuart, but you're not all that. I've had a lot more fun with Logan here, so get over it. I don't want anything more to do with you anyway, so it's just as well you found out about our affair." What a horrible woman, I think. Those two narcissists most certainly deserve each other.
Natasha, please don't go. Don't go. Can't we just talk? Just give me a moment of your time. We need to talk,"
comes Logan's whining voice that is beginning to irritate me.
"I promise you, Natasha, this will never ever happen again. You have my word."
Oh, please, Logan, don't humiliate yourself more than you have to. I get up. I roll the wheels of my yellow suitcase across the ground, with Stuart by my side. We return to the lift. I call a taxi to drop me off at my parents' house, while I say goodbye to Stuart and wish him well. Good luck, I say. I hope you have better luck next time in your relationships.
"You too," he says.
It had been a couple of weeks since I discovered Logan had been cheating on me. It was humiliating returning home, confessing to both my parents and my sister Emma that the wedding was off, and that I had discovered Logan cheating on me. My father had not taken the news very well. Like any father, he's always been exceedingly protective towards me and my sister. I think in some ways he thinks he's failed me. He was so delighted when me and Logan got together. But now the contempt he's feeling towards Logan is prodigious.
If I ever see that man again, I will wring his neck myself. I'm sorry, my darling,
he says, gathering me in his arms affectionately.
I really thought he was one of the good ones. It seems I got him horribly wrong. I consider myself a very good judge of character. If I had the slightest inkling that he lacked integrity, I would have certainly persuaded you against marrying him. But I was under the impression he was so charming and would take remarkably good care of you. But it seems I got him all wrong.
Don't beat yourself up about it, Dad. Stuff happens. We all got Logan wrong. But I'm well rid of him now, and I'm not going to let this break up or destroy my life.
Good girl, says my father. It's like when you fall off a horse, you get right back up again. It's the same in life. You don't let any little tumbles and falls get you down. You move onwards and upwards, as they say.
Well, it's a good thing you got back early from the airport. That's all I can say, says my mother. I thank God for that. At least you spared yourself a nasty divorce later on in the day. Once a cheater, always a cheater. You've had a lucky escape, sweetheart. Your father's absolutely right. We never saw this coming. I liked Logan a lot. He seemed like such a decent sort. How could we have misjudged him so badly? It's called a wolf in sheep's clothing, pipes Emma. They come across so nice, but they're really just a snake in the grass. For the first couple of weeks, I felt as empty and hollow as a broken egg. But I never cried, not even once. I never spilt a single tear for Logan. I was more angry with myself for being so duped than upset, but my reaction was revelatory to me, as instead of feeling despair, I actually felt relief, as if a great big monumental weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It does make me wonder, in hindsight, whether beneath the layers of my mind, somewhere deep in my guts, was an all-knowing, sagacious wisdom and discernment that I had not tapped into consciously. Needless to say, he had been phoning me non-stop, Logan that is, sending me all kinds of messages on my cell that I refused to acknowledge or answer. He had sent me bountiful bouquets of flowers to the house where no expense had been spared, with messages declaring his undying, unconditional love for me, which promptly all ended up in the bin. Logan had even knocked on our door, asking to speak to me, but my enraged father had told him to get the hell away from me. I've never seen my father so pugnaciously cantankerous towards anyone before. It's good to have everyone fighting my corner for me. I know I don't have a monopoly on being cheated on. It happens to so many people regularly all around the world. But when it happens to you individually, it's hard not to take personally, to feel in some way that you weren't good enough. It can be crushing to your confidence and self-esteem. Sweetheart, my mother asks me one day, your father and I rarely think you need a break. She looks at me warmly through her kind brown eyes. I know you've been magnanimously stoic, dear, but you don't have to maintain a stiff upper lip with us. We're your parents, for goodness sake. We love you. Sometimes we wish you'd talk to us, to tell us what's going on in that little head of yours. She sighs. You've always been so quiet, dear, so reticent, so desperately private. You really don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You can give us some of the burden to carry for you. If you talk to us, that is. It's not because I'm shy or keeping stuff from you, Mum, I insist. It's just the way I am. If you say so, dear. Now listen. When I was at bridge last night, Mrs. Simmons, now she's a remarkable elderly lady, very astute bridge player, as sharp as a hawk she is, she happened to mention to me, in passing, that her sister's going to England for a couple of weeks to stay with their brother. I gather she's got a cottage outside of Portland. She needs someone to look after their 2 schnauzers and a large Maine Coon cat. I told her you'd love to take care of them for her, that you're a very big animal lover. Well, why would you tell her a thing like that? I ask in astonishment, unable to hide my annoyance. Because, sweetheart, you need a break, some fresh air to get away from New York. It would do you the world of good, it really would. A couple of weeks in nature. Now don't stare a gift horse in the mouth. It's the quintessential opportunity for you to get away from here. It'll be a tonic for you, I promise.
Your mother's right, sweetheart. It's very good for you to get away from New York. Spend some time in nature. It's exactly what you need.
I wasn't exactly happy with my parents for meddling in my personal affairs, so reluctantly I took a couple of weeks off work, for I knew in my heart they were right. It would do me the world of good to get away for a while. So off I went to explore new horizons, even if it was just to humour my parents and finally get them off my back. I could tell they were worried about me, as my lack of enthusiasm in talking about anything was always wrongly misinterpreted as my being buttoned up and very reserved. Suffice to say, they thought I was struggling emotionally, which wasn't the case at all. Yes, I was grievously hurt, but I was audaciously determined as well to move on with my life and not to look back. I discovered the trip would be about 7 hours by car, if I wanted to get there quickly, which really isn't bad at all. So I decided to set off at 5 in the morning, so that I would arrive at the cottage before lunchtime. Needless to say, the journey was pretty seamless, although I did encounter some annoying roadworks and a few unfortunate delays along the way. So in reality, I arrived at my destination probably closer to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, rather than lunchtime, as I had anticipated. I was now driving my red Honda around aimlessly, while I looked for this cottage everywhere. It was exceedingly frustrating for me, rather like searching for a needle in a haystack. I was almost cursing my mother under my breath for sending me on this wild goose chase. I was beginning to seriously regret agreeing to look after a random stranger's pets, whom by all accounts lived in the middle of nowhere, by the ominous looks of things. Why are there no signs anywhere, I wondered. I got completely lost, as even my GPS seemed to be playing ambiguous games with me. I thought these things were supposed to be steadfastly reliable, but certainly not so. Finally, I find an inconspicuous, rather obscure, nebulous dirt road, surrounded by very high embankments of trees, namely ponderosa pines, Douglas firs and Pacific yew trees that framed the edges of the roads, like debonair, viridescent, tall, sultry giants. Everywhere I cast my wary blue eyes. There were trees, still more trees, and even more trees, rocky embankments, patches of green turf, and a very big blue cobalt sky, but not a solitary soul in sight anywhere to be seen. To date, I've never driven on a more precarious, treacherous stretch of road before, a hazardous minefield of jagged rocks, all too eager to trip you up. It didn't help either that my truck jolted up and down unsteadily along this road, while my rubber tires siphoned up ribbons of dust that laced the air in white clouds, while little pebbles pelted and pinged against the lower carriage of my vehicle. I discerned a little path that veered off the road, that was so indistinct, so elliptical, I wasn't entirely sure it was a road at all, as it was heavily overgrown with turf. I figured I had nothing left to lose, so I followed this inconspicuous, undefined path. I sighed with relief as my truck reached a white wicker gate, labelled the Gingerbread House. This must be it, surely, I think. I find myself staring at a large, sprawling, open wild meadow, a haven of long grasses, interspersed with pretty pink, blue, yellow, purple, and white flowers that pop their blooms audaciously through the foliage, while a colourful confetti of ethereal butterflies bobs graciously from one blossoming flower head to another. I see the outer perimeters of this sumptuous meadow are fastidiously fenced in by a white wicker fence on one side. Ah, I was actually here. It would seem relief flooded over me, like a cool, refreshing breeze. I quickly get out of my vehicle, walking over to the white wicker gate to open it. It squeaks loudly as I push it open. Clearly it's in desperate need of a good oiling. I stand still for a moment as I take it all in. A shiver descends down my spine. I have the overwhelming, prickling sensation that something is watching me from behind one of the trees, as the whole area to the left-hand side of the cottage appears to be just forest. I was certain I had caught sight of a tall, dark, shadowy figure moving behind a tree, but it must have been my imagination, surely. A trick of the light, perhaps. But why? Why did I feel so irrefutably certain that I was being watched? Of course I'm jaded, I tell myself reassuringly. I mean, I'd been out on that open road for long enough. My eyes are fatigued and fuzzy from all that concentration, which is why I'm seeing abstract things that are clearly not even there. I climb back warily in my vehicle, slamming the door behind me and shaking my head. Honestly, what am I like? I'd lose my head if I wasn't careful. I drive towards the cottage, where I park on the wide open stretch of red brick paving that circumnavigates the entire area, where there are terracotta flower pots on every corner, filled with blooming, colourful displays of budding perennials. The cottage itself is whimsically charming and endearing, with an engaging warmth that is so welcoming. I will admit that it's like something out of a fairy tale, pretty and quaint. But then again, what would ever induce someone to live out here, in the middle of nowhere, especially on their own, with the only access to the nearby town, driving down a confusing maze of disagreeable, problematic, bumpy roads that are so poorly marked and signposted that would invariably make any journey at best laborious or at worst perilously dangerous. I would describe this congenial home as a 2-story symmetrical cottage, painted in a pale minty green colour, with large white sash windows, with matching white shutters, and a very well-appointed black-tiled roof. It looks so innocent, wholesome, fresh. I notice the white wooden front door opens. A young man comes bolting out, followed by 2 yapping, rambunctious grey schnauzers that run up to me with tails wagging, bodies wiggling with ebullience. The young man, who give or take a year or two, is roughly about my age, in his early 20s. He gives me a wide grin, showing off a set of pearly white teeth that light up his face, highlighting genuine warm blue eyes. He's nothing like the boys in New York. He's got that take-me-as-I-am, easygoing kind of look about him, with no apologies. I perceive he's totally comfortable with who he is, with no pretentious airs or graces. If he has an ego like Logan, I don't see it, as even his casual clothes are not dictated by fashion, for they're comfortable, everyday, non-dressy looking. He's wearing a red and black plaid shirt, jeans, a thick leather belt with a large buckle, and a pair of cowboy boots. "Hi, my name's Tom," he says to me. "You must be Natalie. It's good to meet you." He points to a cleared. "If you follow that path down there, it's a quick shortcut that leads to my parents' farmhouse," he explains to me. "So if you need anything, you know where to come. We have fresh milk, butter, eggs, cheese, honey, always available there. Have you got your cell phone with you?" he asks me. I nod, handing it to him. He keys his number into my cell phone, handing it back to me. "There you are. Call me if you need me to pop around at any time, or if you feel nervous or afraid. It gets tenebrously dark out here at night. Some of the noises out here from the coyotes and other wild animals tend to unnerve city folk. But out here we're used to those strange noises. It goes with the territory of living in the countryside. How was your trip here?" he asks me suddenly. "Your journey all right, was it?" I nod. "Well, it took longer than I expected," I admit. "Well, I was beginning to think you were struggling to find the place. It's easy to get lost out here." He hands me the keys to the cottage. "This dog here, he's Buddy," he says, pointing to the schnauzer with the blue diamante collar. "And this one here is Ruby. She has the pink diamante collar. They belong to old Miss Simmons. I might add she's exceedingly grateful that you come all the way from New York to watch over her pets while she's away in London. She lives on our land, you see," he explains to me. "I've known her all my life. Such a lovely lady. The big Maine Coon cat is inside. She's lying on the sofa in there. Her name's Princess. Her idea of exercise is lounging around all day long," he jokes. "But she's one hell of an impressive cat. Just you wait and see." "I'm looking forward to meeting her," I say. "I do hope you haven't been waiting too long for me. I will admit I did get rather lost on the way here." "Well, it's no big deal," he says, flushing awkwardly. I surmise, based on his bashful reaction, that he's been hanging around for quite a while. "Right, I think I'll be off now.
I've got a stable to muck out, hungry horses to feed. I'll love you and leave you. Enjoy your stay here. I watch him walking down the long, narrow trail through the woods. It's nice to know that there is a human presence not too far away from me, in this remote location, and Tom seems like rather a likeable fellow. I'm delighted to see that this informal cottage is marvellously practical, sumptuously cosy, modestly unembellished on the inside, with comfortable lived-in couches that look well worn, bookshelves messily stacked with tattered books that have been read definitely hundreds of times over. Even though Miss Simmons may be an old lady, she's clearly got taste, and a passionate zeal for trees of all shapes, sizes and specimens. The pictures on her wall are most usually pictures of trees, boasting branches bedecked with viridescent leaves, others ablaze with resplendent autumn foliage, some sporting branches bejewelled with delicate blossoms from spring, while others show boughs heavily laden with fruit. And then there are the winter branches, barren and stripped of all their glorious finery. You'd think living out here in the countryside she'd have enough of trees, but it seems that that is certainly not the case. Perhaps you can't get enough of a good thing. The narrow entrance hall extends out to a wide living area, in an open-plan room, where one large wall is completely devoted to displaying a plethora of tree pictures with wise sayings written underneath the trees. One tree is a magnificent redwood tree, with a sign at the bottom that reads, "If you've been around for as long as I have, you learn a thing or two about life." Another tree is an oak tree, which reads, "If it's not working for you, shed those thoughts like I shed my leaves, and grow new ones." Then there's a pear tree with fruit dangling from the branches reading, "Let your fruit shine before men, and they will surely know who you are." And then there's a cherry tree in blossom that reads, "Do not be afraid to express the glory of who you really are." I make my acquaintance with Princess, the big cat. She's lying across the sofa. She's the Maine Coon. She's a wild cat hybrid, and when I put her on the scale, I kid you not, she weighs 11 kilos. Can you believe her body is over 1 metre long, with long silky brown and cream hair? But although she sleeps on the couch all day, she's the most affectionate cat I've ever met. Until now I've never been a cat person, but Princess's personality is changing my mind. I'd love to smuggle her back home to New York with me, but regretfully that's never going to happen. Besides, my dad gets allergies from cats. It would seem my mother was absolutely right. I've been in the countryside for a couple of days now. My mother was absolutely right. I feel inspired and relaxed. The stress and toilsome demands of the city have forsaken me graciously, and as far as my ex-fiancé Logan is concerned, I haven't even honoured the man with a moment's thought. I'm finally beginning to acknowledge and appreciate why someone like old Miss Simmons lives out here in a remote spot like this. It speaks to the heart. As Tesla once so judiciously quoted, the mind is sharper and keener in seclusion, and in uninterrupted solitude. I find his poignant, shrewd words discerningly accurate. I've been shopping in town a couple of times to pick up supplies. Believe it or not, I've risen over and above the challenge of tacking that treacherously rocky road. But most of the time I enjoy reading books here, going for leisurely walks in the wood grove. I hasten to add that Miss Simmons' deep devotion for trees has rubbed off on me significantly. The trees around here, they're so majestic. One illustrious poet sums it all up in a nutshell, as he perspicaciously writes so eloquently, "Between two pine trees is a doorway to a brand new world." When you walk through the forest, the scent of the ponderosa pines is so unbelievable, sweet, buttery, very refreshing. Since I've been here, I can't shake off that incongruous feeling that I'm being watched. I'm sure I'm not imagining it. I've always known when someone is looking at me, when I'm travelling on the New York subway to and from Queens. You always just get a sense of it. I usually catch them in the act, but they shiftily always look away. It's exactly the same feeling I'm getting here. But I can't see what it could be that is watching me, as nothing is ever there. It's so frustrating.
On several occasions I could swear, when I'm walking with the two schnauzers trotting ahead of me in the heart of the woodgrove, that something else is following us close behind. I could swear I hear a thumping behind me, snaps and pops of forest debris being crunched under ponderous feet that are not mine. At one point the schnauzers turn around, barking at something, wagging their tails excitedly, but nothing was there. It did make me wonder if the woods are actually haunted. That might explain why I'm not seeing anything. I haven't seen Tom around the place recently, but he's been ever so kind and generous to me, in making me feel so welcome. Every morning without fail, when I get up, I discover a huge rainbow trout hanging from a leather string outside the front door, tied to the horseshoe knocker. There's also a grass basket below on the ground, filled with the largest, juiciest berries I've ever seen, that he's picked for me. And sometimes there's even a bunch of wild flowers. I'm really going to have to go to his farm in the morning to thank him for his generous gifts. He must be quite some fisherman to catch such a phenomenal-sized fish like this. Needless to say, I fry up the trout every morning for breakfast and eat it with a plethora of butter and garlic. It melts in the mouth. It's incredibly delicious. I don't know why the man is picking wild flowers for me. I'm not sure if it's a romantic overture or a friendly gesture on his part, but I will take it as the latter. They're very pretty, though, but the truth is they fade rather quickly, don't last terribly long in a vase. But I guess it's a thought that counts. Logan would always buy me flowers from a florist and be done with it. But these wild flowers must have taken quite a punctilious amount of time and industrious effort to pick, so the resolute trouble that Tom is going to on my account is really rather flattering. When I've spoken to my parents over the telephone, they inform me that Logan has been hassling my sister Emma, asking for my contact details, which is remarkably unsettling, as I don't want to ever see him again. I know what Emma's like. She's one of those people that can never say no to anyone. So if she gives Logan this address, I will quite literally swing for her. Excuse the expression, but he is the last person I want to see. I'd been reading my book on the couch and fallen asleep. I'd been asleep for hours, as it's so dark outside the cottage. I can see the thick blanket of black through the glass pane of the windows. I remain parked on the couch, too lazy to get up. I switch on the reading lamp, as the light switch is an arm's length away from me, which is expediently convenient. Perhaps old Miss Simmons reads on this couch a lot, I think, and likes the commodious access to the light switch. Why does the couch have to be this comfortable? I can see why Princess parks here all day long. I would too if I was a cat. I continue to read my book. It's a gripping novel that is absorbing my attention, consuming my interest. I want to know who murdered the poor receptionist. Suddenly the two schnauzers, who were lying fast asleep at my feet moments before, perk up. They've heard something, but what? Their ears are pointed forward, their dark eyes fixed on the window. Then they get up and race towards the door, barking excitedly, rearing up on their hind legs as they paw at the door, their tails wagging, almost as if they have prior knowledge as to who is outside the door. Sometimes at night they do bark for no reason at all, when there's nothing there. I'm certain I've just seen a face staring at me. I thought I saw some eye shine and lids blinking through the window, but it was evanescently fleeting, so once again I doubt myself. But I walk over to the door and open it, cautiously at first, my uncertainty clouded in hesitancy, which is soon dashed when I open the door and no one is there. Yet there is a rainbow trout attached to the brass horseshoe knocker by a leather string. There's also a basket of berries on the doorstep, and some wild flowers. It must have been Tom at the door. I'm certain I'd caught a fleeting glimpse of a dark, elusive shadow, an obscure figure, disappearing into the woodgrove. I quickly grab my torch. I decide to go after Tom to thank him for the rainbow trout. It's the least I can do. I wonder why he's so evasive. I never got the impression he was shy when I met him before, but then again I don't know him that well. "Tom!" I call, running into the woodgrove after him, following the path that leads to his parents' farmhouse. Luckily the earthen trail is very distinctive. It's straightforward and smooth. There's a soft breeze blowing against my skin as I run into the woods calling Tom's name. "Tom! Tom! Tom, is that you over there? Tom!" There is no answer. I call out again, "Tom! Tom! Is that you?" I am met by a placid, serene, sequestered, secluded silence that makes me feel conspicuously alone in this grove of trees. I become aware of the temperate whistle of the breeze blowing through the trees, the chirruping chorus of crickets and frogs permeating the air with their nightly song. Somewhere far away, I can hear the distant howls of a coyote on the wind. It is tenebrously dark in this woods, airy even, but I've never employed fear in my life, nor am I about to engage in it now. Yet I cannot shake the unearthly, incredulous feeling that I'm not alone. Somewhere, loitering in the indistinct undergrowth, I am certain that I am being surreptitiously watched, even stalked by a pair of unseen eyes. And whether they're menacious or benevolent, I cannot be sure. But the sense of being clandestinely scrutinized is impossible to extinguish. I know something is watching me. I fail to disengage the provocative, unsettling feeling that gathers in my mind, like inky storm clouds over the horizon. I hear a brisk, energetic flap of wings as something flies past me. A bat, I think, possibly an owl. In a trice, an obscure caliginous figure, hiding behind the bushes, bolts away. A mother doe, followed by her fawn. 2 pairs of yellow eyes stare back at me, and are gone at lightning speed. I feel the soft wave of relief caress me gently, reassuring the sharp edges of my jagged nerves that there is nothing to fear. It would seem that at night, this normally viridescent woodgrove loses its congenial warmth, as it eclipses the sunlight, embracing the twilight. Then it wears a gloomy, sombre energy upon its shoulders, like a dark blanket. Without my torch, I would feel lost in this velvety darkness, for even the moonlight with her gentle prisms of silvery blue light is not generous. Her luminescence is all but a flimsy crescent. The trees are gathered together, so many of them in congenial groups, like tall strangers at a football stadium that are cheering on the sports players. Their leaves jiggle and rustle with excitement, like a cheerleader's pom-poms. Then the gentle wind whips up the branches, which sway up and down. Finally, I leave behind this woodland sanctuary, to reveal the large, sprawling open area of a wide meadow that stretches before me like a vast ocean. I can smell good quality sweet alpha hay, like a scented, pleasing perfume, well-fermented silage, some horse manure, leather tack, the sweet scent of blooming apple trees. Standing up proud and expansively wide against the inky twilight is the large silhouette of a symmetrical-shaped farmhouse, with all the windows bathed in darkness, suggesting that the entire household must be fast asleep. I see a tractor parked near the house on the driveway, along with a scattering of trucks. A dog is barking in the house. It sounds like a big breed to me, most likely a Labrador. I can hear someone unbolting the front door. I see the silhouette of a man with a flashlight peering into the darkness. This is my cue to leave, to slip away clandestinely into the shadows and return home, feeling certain again that I'm still being shadowed. The following morning I wake up to find Tom pounding on the front door of my cottage. His face is wearing a broad grin. His hand is carrying a bag containing honey, farm eggs, fresh milk, homemade butter and cheese. "Hello, I brought you some stuff from the farm," he says, handing it to me. "Come in," I say, retrieving his bag. "Would you like a cup of coffee or tea?" "Tea would be nice," he says. "I just want to thank you for all your gifts. You really are so generous. I tried to catch you last night to thank you, but you were gone so quickly. When I got back to the farmhouse, all your lights were out. I guess everybody was fast asleep. But you were nowhere to be seen. It was like you disappeared into thin air. Are you always this evasive?" Tom wrinkles his forehead in perplexement. "Sorry. I think we've got our wires crossed somewhere down the line. What gifts are you talking about? And last night? No, I wasn't here last night. I've been meaning to pop around sooner to see how you're doing. But it's been a hell of a busy at the farm. I just haven't had the time to pop around to see you. Besides, I've been very exhausted." My face pales. I look at Tom with a bewildered expression upon my face. "But I don't understand. Someone's been leaving me rainbow trout, berries and flowers from the meadow at my front door.
Tom looks nonplussed. Well, it wasn't me.
I show him the huge rainbow trout, perched on the plate in my refrigerator. I thought this was from you.
That's one hell of a beauty, says Tom in admiration. Obviously caught at the creek. How peculiarly strange. It seems like you have a secret admirer who knows a thing or two about fishing.
That night before retiring to bed, I keep reflecting on who is generously delivering me gifts. It's more than a little baffling and incomprehensible to me. If I didn't know any better, I'd think Tom is absolutely right, and that I do have a secret admirer somewhere. But whoever they are, they appear to be exceedingly ambiguous. I'm preparing myself some hot cocoa in the kitchen when I hear a truck rolling down the driveway, the sound of a truck braking as it parks, a car door slamming, footsteps pounding the ground, and someone ramming impatiently on the brass knocker of the front door. I open the door to find Logan standing in the doorway, and regretfully the two schnauzers have sneakily escaped through the crack in the door, and have mischievously darted off into the woodgrove. Oh no, this is all I need. What are you doing here, Logan? I say, my voice brisk. I told you, it's over between us. I don't want to see you again. Please get lost.
What am I doing here? That's rich even coming from you. You haven't responded to any of my texts. I haven't heard a dicky bird from you. We were supposed to be getting married. You willfully choose to ignore me. Now that's not fair. Fortunately, your sister Emma gave me your address. As your parents were exceedingly uncooperative, it's like they think I'm the devil in disguise. You've rarely given them a misleading impression of me, haven't you? Your father seems to think I'm a low form of pond life. I've driven 6 hours in my truck to get here, and this place has been a god-awful nightmare to find. There are no signs anywhere, and that road, oh my word, it's treacherous. But I would go to the ends of the earth for you. I hope you know that.
You've wasted your time coming here, Logan. We've got nothing to talk about. I would have thought you'd got the message by now. You cheated on me, Logan. Get that? You expect me to take you back after what you've done? You've got to be kidding. That's never ever going to happen. I'm like an elephant. I don't forget. Logan looks at me defiantly. It's like he can't believe I don't want anything more to do with him. I think that revelation has hit him like a bucket of ice-cold water over his head. Does he really have the arrogant presumptuousness to think I would consider rekindling our relationship after his treachery?
You're being exceedingly unreasonable. You didn't have the decency to even hear me out. Did I not tell you Teresa meant nothing to me? Nothing at all. It was just a wild fling, a moment of madness that I seriously regret. Surely you know and appreciate that. She was my secretary. She came on to me, not the other way round. In a weak moment, I fell under her spell. It happens sometimes.
She meant nothing to you. It didn't sound like nothing to me when you were entertaining her in your bedroom back there, when you opened the front door wearing only your boxers. I saw all I needed to see, Logan. So will you kindly get back into your truck and go home? Now, if you will excuse me, I say, gathering up the 2 dog leads in my hands. They're 2 schnauzers that have got out, thanks to you. They're now running wild in the woodgrove. I need to go and get them right now, before they get eaten by coyotes. As I walk into the woodgrove, Logan is following behind me.
Don't you love me any more? Is that what this is all about?
I'm not sure I ever did love you, Logan. When I discovered you were cheating on me, yes, I felt hurt. Yes, I was bitterly disappointed, especially in you. But believe it or not, I actually felt a sense of relief. Maybe underneath it all, I knew you were rotten to the core, a bad apple.
Don't you start labelling me. I'm not a bad apple. It was one mistake. I tell you, I won't ever do it again.
I ignore Logan. I need to find the dogs. I'm calling their names while flashing the torchlight to look for them, but they're nowhere to be seen. I'm feeling anxious. I'm warned not to let the dogs out at night by Tom. The coyotes are an ever-present danger to them. "Boy, it's dark in here," says Logan. "Gloomy." He follows me like a lapdog into the woodgrove, falsely assuming that if he pleads his case with me, I'll change my mind. But hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. There is nothing that he could ever say to make me take him back. Nothing. I'm not interested in him any more, as without trust, a relationship is never worth salvaging. I call out the dogs' names. "Ruby! Ruby! Ruby! Buddy! Buddy!" I hear 2 squeals in response, and that is when Logan and I see him. I can hear Logan saying under his breath, "Bloody hell!" He's so astonished. He stands there in the woods with his mouth so wide open. If he's not careful, he might swallow a whole bunch of mosquitoes. I realize at once this creature is a Bigfoot. I'm from New York. I've always regarded such spurious creatures as a mythical part of pulp fiction, but there is nothing fictitious about this creature. Nothing at all. This Bigfoot is real. He's majestic, lofty, easily 9 foot tall, possibly 800 pounds, covered in dark, flowing, silky hair that has a pronounced sheen. The creature has shoulder muscles so large and bulky, creating the effect you often see in those NFL pads the football players wear on their shoulders. The top part of his body is hugely big, while his legs are also powerfully strong and dense with muscle. He has the kind of sturdy, robust form, like a rhino or elephant, that would be very difficult to take down with a rifle. Under each of the creature's oversized long arms, he's carrying the 2 schnauzers, but they're not afraid of him or in fear of their lives at all, but rather look like 2 schnauzers that have been caught for being naughty. I'm in no doubt they're acquainted with this Bigfoot and know him well, for they're not wiggling or trying to escape from his grasp. On the contrary, they're making a few happy yaps and wagging their tails. The Bigfoot is shy, but he moves towards me and puts Ruby on the ground in front of me, whereupon I attach her lead to her collar, and then he does exactly the same for Buddy, so that now both my dogs are on leads and can be returned to the cottage. I say thank you. He seems to smile back at me through his bright, shiny eyes, which are kind and benevolent, but I get the sense he really, really likes me, almost as if he's taken quite a shine to me. The creature nods and turns away, and then literally disappears into the heart of the woods.
"Oh, my word! Did you see that? Did you see that? It was a Bigfoot! It was a Bigfoot! Oh, I can't believe it! I had no idea those things were real."
I don't know what Logan is saying, and I don't care. His words are like a monotonous mumble to me. All I can think about is that incredible Bigfoot who rescued the 2 schnauzers tonight, whom both seemed totally unafraid by him, almost as if they were reasonably well acquainted with him. How extraordinary, I think. I return back to the cottage and put Miss Simmons' 2 schnauzers back in there, closing the door behind me. I walk purposely towards Logan's truck, getting the distinct feeling that I'm still being watched. We are being watched, but this time I know who's watching us. It's the male Bigfoot. It would make sense, perfect sense to me. I smile to myself. Knowing that the Bigfoot is out there actually makes me feel rather safe. Would you go, Logan? I'm really not interested in pursuing our relationship any further. I thought I made my feelings clear. And I'm certainly not interested in an open relationship, if that's what you're looking for.
Be reasonable, for goodness sake. Am I not allowed to make one little mistake without being subjected to your fierce wrath and condemnation? We're getting married. We still have our bookings for the Plaza Hotel. The invitations are ready to be sent out. What are we waiting for? If we can get over a little bump in the road, we can get through everything together. Granted, I slipped up. I had a little wobble. I'm sorry, but it won't happen again.
Even if what you say is true, and you did have a little wobble, it's too late, Logan. Too late. Don't you get that? I don't respect you anymore, nor do I trust you. So even if we did get married, there would be this dark shadow looming over our lives. When I look at you, all I can see is what you did, and I can't get that graphic imagery out of my mind. Logan puts his hands on my shoulder. He tries to draw me in to his arms. I push him away with a shove. Get your hands off me, Logan. What do you think you're doing? All of a sudden, the Bigfoot we'd seen earlier comes charging out of the woods like a bullet. He darts towards us, his attention focused completely on Logan. He stands there and points to Logan's car. His lips are twitching. He's curling his mouth back. In such an intimidating way, he begins to growl at Logan. It's a sound not unlike a dog might make when guarding a bone. Logan quickly gets the message as the creature glares at him defiantly. All right, I'm going, he says, more to the creature than to me. I watch him climb into his truck, throw on his safety belt. He's physically trembling. I don't feel that he feels comfortable with the menacing look he's receiving from the Bigfoot, and wants to get out of here as fast as he can. The Bigfoot runs with his truck until he's sure that Logan has gone. I thank the creature. He nods at me, looking at me with shy, infatuated eyes. And then I realize that this is my secret admirer, that he's the one that's been leaving fish for me, berries and wild flowers from the valley. Thank you, I say. Thank you for your gifts. I flush. I know he comprehends exactly what I'm saying, but this Bigfoot, despite his huge size, is painfully shy. He gives me a reticent nod. I noticed that night when I returned to bed that the Bigfoot has been regularly patrolling up and down throughout the night outside my cottage in case Logan comes back. I think the creature wants to make me feel safe. The next day I'm invited over to Logan's farmhouse for lunch. Logan's mother rather reminds me of a 1950s housewife. When I look at her, it's rather like rolling back the hands of time and going back to another period in our history. I notice even the farm kitchen is done in those old-world vintage greens and has that quintessential 1950s look about it that has been coming back into fashion of late. The farm kitchen is cosy and warm. There are pots boiling away merrily on the range, with clouds of white steam rising above them. The kitchen smells of delicious food. The oak table has been set for lunch. There's a bunch of pink roses in pride of place in the middle of the table. "This is Natasha, Mum," says Tom. "She's the one staying at Miss Simmons' property." "Hello," I say, smiling at her politely. "Hello, dear. It's so lovely to make your acquaintance. Do sit down." Both me and Logan sit down at the table, with glasses of cola, while his mother busies herself mashing potatoes and carving a delicious-looking chicken on the sideboard. "I found out who my secret admirer is," I tell Logan. "It's a Bigfoot." "You're kidding." "It's a Bigfoot that has been giving you those fabulous rainbow trout." I nod. "And he appears to be very good friends with the Schnauzer dogs." Tom grins. "That explains a whole lot to me. Now the pieces are beginning to fit together very well. An enigmatic mystery appears to have been solved. Miss Simmons was always saying that in the middle of the night her two dogs would bark at the door, wag their tails, but there was nothing ever there. She actually believed they might be seeing an apparition or something, as dogs can often sense, perceive things we can't. She would be very worried if they got out at night. She'd go looking for them, calling out their names. They mischievously would tear around the woodgrove, obliviously unaware of the danger they were both in. Miss Simmons would call them, retreat back to the cottage with a heavy heart. As her previous Schnauzer had been killed by a couple of coyotes, she was certain that her two disobedient dogs would meet the same deadly fate. She was certain of it. She would return very sadly to the house, to be greeted by her two Schnauzer dogs, thrilled to see her. It was as if they were saying, "Where have you been? You've been gone for ages. We're so happy you're finally home." Sometimes she thought she was losing her marbles. She knew they'd got out, so how did they get back into the house? Someone was returning her dogs. She came to the conclusion that one of the farm hands, a man called Dirk, who'd been killed when he fell off a tractor 5 years prior, who loved dogs with a passion, was watching her cottage from beyond the grave, returning her dogs safely back home to her. She'd always thanked the ghost of Dirk, but I think it's safe to say the ghost of Dirk is no other than a very protective Bigfoot.
Of course, I shan't be telling Miss Simmons about that. She's very attached to her ghostly friend, whom she believes has been watching over her dogs."
Wow, that is some story. To cut a long story short, on the day I returned back to New York, when I was leaving home in my car, my heart was heavy. I really didn't want to return to the Big Apple. I'd enjoyed my stay here. And of course the presence of a Maine Coon called Princess, along with 2 friendly schnauzers and a Bigfoot who had taken quite a shine to me. I really didn't want to leave this place, but I knew I didn't have a choice in the matter. To this day, Miss Simmons' dogs mysteriously return to her cottage whenever they get out, and she's always thanking Dirk, the friendly ghost. In the last 5 years, my ex-boyfriend Logan has already had 2 failed marriages behind him, and the cause of the marital breakdown was, of course, infidelity. Tom and I remain in touch, and I'm now engaged to Stuart, the very man who shared takeaways with me outside Logan's property 6 years ago. So let's just say the universe has a great sense of humour. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Ariel, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1987 when my parents sent me away to a North American boarding school when I was about 13 years old. My family is initially from Seattle, but my father's job as a sports journalist and commentator invariably meant that the whole family was always being uprooted, which meant that I'd end up being pulled out of one school and placed into another, which was very unsettling for me as a child. No sooner had I laid down roots in one school, my father would be relocated once again, and I would be tossed into another school. My parents soon began to realise that this bobbing around from one school to another like the proverbial bee, buzzing from one flower to the very next, was clearly having a catastrophic effect on my grades and causing me a significant amount of distress. You see, growing up I was painfully shy and rather petite for my age, and whenever I relocated to another school, it took ages for me to make friends all over again, and I became like a fish out of water in a very strange environment. And being the new girl in the school was not a pretty place to be, especially for someone as withdrawn, reticent and reserved as myself. I truly felt like a goldfish in a shark-infested tank, fighting to survive and keep my head above water from one day to the next. There were occasions when I managed to make friends, but I never hung around with the hip crowd, so to speak, but usually with the waifs and strays that no one wanted to befriend. Somehow I felt much more at ease and relaxed hanging around with the social misfits, because I was not confident or assertive, and besides, some of the so-called misfits were very amenable and congenial. After my parents continually received abysmal reports about my progress in school and my flagging grades, they began to believe that the lack of stability in my school life was causing me to lag behind, and that was when the horrifying idea of sending me to boarding school was finally born. "Look at Ariel's frightful report," my mother would say, looking at me with an expression of extreme disappointment on her face. "Listen to this, Ariel. What do you have to say about this?" The report read, "Ariel is struggling to fit in at school. She's a very quiet, withdrawn young girl who doesn't interact with the rest of the pupils or even make an effort to make friends. During class, Ariel daydreams and pays little attention to the lessons, and her lack of focus is subsequently affecting her performance at school. Her grades are extremely poor. I do believe that if Ariel was more attentive and interacted more during the lessons, she would produce much better results. I do not believe that your daughter lacks intelligence, but her motivation and disinterest are causing her huge setbacks, which is invariably compromising her performance at school." "What on earth is wrong with you, Ariel? Why don't you concentrate in class at all? And what about all this dreadful daydreaming business? How can you ever expect to succeed in school if you're not paying attention during class?" my mother snapped. "I hate school, Mum," I said. "The teacher's always picking on me. She hit me with a ruler on my knuckle because she said I wasn't paying any attention the other day, and all the kids just laughed, and they were whispering and sniggering at me behind my back." "Well, why weren't you paying any attention?" my mother snapped. "For goodness sake, you're a bright girl, Ariel. What on earth is going on with you?" "But, Mum, I'm always the new girl at school, and nobody ever takes me seriously," I complained. "Nobody even talks to me." It might just help, Ariel, if you made a teensy-weensy effort to make friends. We can't have you falling behind in your grades like this. You're a huge embarrassment to your father and I. For goodness sake, girl, pull your socks up. I remember hearing my parents discussing me in avid detail, as if I was a dreadful thorn in the side that needed to be dealt with at once. Then I heard my mother suggest to my dad that I went to boarding school, and the idea was utterly appalling to me, as I hated and dreaded school with a fervent passion, and the idea of sleeping on the enemy turf was the most terrifying thought of my entire life. It would seem that despite my tearful tantrums, begging, pleading and protesting, my mother was utterly determined that come hell or high water, I was going to boarding school whether I liked it or not. And that was that. And my father really didn't have much say in the matter at all. I remember he looked at me and said, "Ariel, you know what your mother's like. I have no say in the matter. If I had my way, you would stay at home. But you know who rules the roost in this household. It's always your mother." "But Dad," I protested, "you also have a say in the matter. Why do you let Mum always have her way?" "Because what's best is best, my dear. You know what your mother's like. When you're in a tiger's cage, you don't provoke the animal, or you might just be torn to shreds." "Mum," I begged, "please let me stay at home. I promise I'll work so much harder from now on." "You brought this on yourself, Ariel, dear," my mother told me. "If it wasn't for your bad performance in school, we wouldn't be sending you to boarding school in the first place. Hopefully a bit of tough love with the matrons will bring out the best in your character." Growing up, I really loathed my mother, and I adored my father. The only problem with my dad was that he would always do whatever my mother wanted to appease her. You see, my mother was such a difficult, convoluted woman, and even my grandmother once told me many years later that she always believed my mother would end up having multiple divorces because she was such a taxing and tough person to live with. Certainly, as a child growing up, my mother's constant belittling and badgering of me was doing very little to engender any warm feelings of love towards her in my young heart, and now I began to despise her with all my being, and all the more now that she was insisting upon me being sent to boarding school. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I was now in boarding school, hating and loathing every single minute of it, as you can imagine, and I was beginning to be bullied by the girls at school, who clearly thought I was backward and benighted because I was quiet as a church mouse, never saying a single word to anyone. I remember feeling so utterly hopeless and alone in this desolate, solitary world, and I longed to be at home with my loving dad. But I never missed my mother, not for a single moment. The girls at the school I was attending were from wealthy, very privileged backgrounds, and were spoilt, coddled and belligerent, with nasty attitude of self-entitlement and inverted snobbery. They would incessantly talk about boys and clothes and shoes, and they tirelessly made fun of me and bullied me relentlessly. My fragile confidence was shattered like a fine piece of crystal glass, and my self-esteem plunged to great depths of despair, and things were becoming progressively worse as the bullying persisted. I was beginning to believe everything I was being told about myself. I was worthless and inadequate in every way, and my existence on this earth was a dreadful, dreadful mistake, because no one could ever want me, nor could anybody ever love me. I was all alone in the world, and there wasn't a solitary soul out there that could possibly care for me. Well, that's what those nasty girls tried to drill in me day and night, and I'm glad I didn't allow that to affect me. On reflection, I'm glad I was not living during the days of social media, because it's so much easier today for someone to tear you apart, limb from limb, which literally is the most vindictive thing you could possibly do, just at the press of a button. It boggles the mind that bullying still goes on today, but it's so much easier now than it was back then. So I really find that my heart goes out to people in that situation. I remember there was one girl called Lisa Bucker, and I still remember her surname all these years later, and she had long blonde hair that was so long that it fell down to her waist. I remember she had these cold, heartless blue eyes that stared at me with an intense hatred and revulsion, almost like I was the dog scat on her shoe. Lisa was the most popular girl in the class, and the leader of the wolf pack, so to speak, in the school. And she tore me at my self-esteem like a ravenous vulture, ravaging me from limb to limb and delighting in every moment of it. "Look at silly little Ariel," she'd say. "Do you think there's anything in that little head of hers? Has she got a brain or not?" she would mock. "Does anybody know where my cotton wool balls have got to? Oh, yes, I remember. They're in Ariel's heads, because that's all that she's got in there, cotton wool." Everybody would clap and laugh as if Lisa was such a fabulous, incredible hoot and had the most amazing sense of humour. But for some God-forsaken reason, I became the butt of all her jokes, and she ridiculed me with so much gusto, much like a dog with a bone that just refused to let go. Before long, Lisa was sticking paper on my back with words like, "Kick me, I fancy a thump," or "I'm thicker than 2 planks. I've only got cotton wool for brains." And these notes were all designed to humiliate me. On several occasions she tore up my homework so that I got into trouble with the teacher for not completing it. It was absolutely awful. It would seem my quietness and dreadful shyness made me a huge target for all kinds of practical jokes, some that were too humiliating and soul-destroying to even put on paper and express to you and your listeners, because they bring tears to my eyes, even all these years later, just recalling them at all, because the deplorable things that those girls did to me breaks my heart even today. I just wish the adult in me could go back in time to that little girl that I was back then, and encourage her and to tell her to fight back and to put that evil, treacherous Lisa Bucker in her place. And that's what I'd say to any bully today. Don't be afraid. Stand up for yourself. One day the notoriously nasty Lisa Bucker and her friends dragged me kicking and screaming to the school dumpster, which was behind the classrooms and faced the wooded area at the back of the school. I'll never forget that I was thrown violently into this disgusting, revolting and repulsive dumpster that stank to high heaven and was filled with leftover pig swill, such as potatoes, carrot peelings, rotten tomatoes, banana skins, and boxes of peaches that had gone soft and squidgy and were past their best. If things could get any worse, they invariably did. Lisa proceeded to empty plastic bags that were filled with leftover porridge oats, mashed potatoes, and squidged up cauliflower cheese, and she poured this over the top of my head until I was drenched and literally covered with the stuff, and it began to run down my face. "There you are," she sneered jovially. "Look at her now, everybody," she hooted with laughter. "Maybe the oats will give her a few more brain cells, as they're supposed to enhance your cognitive ability, but I'm not sure oats are any good for cotton wool brains, and that's probably what Ariel's got. So I don't know if the oats are going to work. Sorry, Ariel." Everyone took their turn to immerse me with unmentionable layers of soft plums, blackened banana skins, leftover spaghetti, and they were crackling with laughter, almost like witches. It was just awful. "Look how pretty she looks now," sneered Lisa. "Anyone fancy dating little Ariel? Who fancies dating this pile of pig swill and going on the date with Miss Cotton Brains? I certainly doubt anybody would want to." That was how nasty she was. It was quite frightening that anybody could be this cruel. I remember I stood up in the bin crying my heart out. I was covered with all this ghastly, horrible muck. I could hear the girls laughing as they slammed the pedal bin down on me and hooted with laughter. I'm so glad I was such an amusement for them, I thought. For a long while I stood buried beneath layers and layers of this ghastly food that covered me from top to bottom, and it stunk to high heaven. But I wasn't prepared to move, not for a moment, not until I was absolutely certain that the girls did not come back. I didn't want them seeing me get out of the bin, covered in all this ghastly filth, to give them yet another opportunity to have a good laugh at my expense. I just couldn't let that happen. Suddenly I heard a loud thundering noise bounding towards the dumpsters at a very fast speed, sounding almost like a steam train on full throttle. I was certain that Lisa was putting on some crazy act to pander to all her adoring followers, or the wolf pack, so to speak. She was making a very strange breathing noise like a horse, and was opening one dumpster after another. I was pretty certain that it was Lisa Bucker, and I couldn't imagine what she was planning to do next, but she was certainly coming back to torment and ridicule me further. So despite the fact that I was covered from head to toe with all this rotting filth and nasty smelling putrid garbage, I was not going to move a muscle, not to give her any satisfaction whatsoever. I know I thought, as the bins were open and I lay beneath the layers of rotting flesh, that she was coming back, and she was going to make as much fun as possible of me and humiliate me in every possible way. To my amazement, something appeared to be poking around in the bin above my covered head, and was breathing like a horse. But this time it genuinely sounded like a horse, not like someone was acting like they were breathing like a horse. It wasn't Lisa, I realised. But then who was it, I wondered. I pushed my head through the sea of debris that covered my entire head to find myself staring face to face with a huge, hairy ape-like humanoid, and in that moment I do not know who was more shocked, me or the critter. In his humongous hands he was holding 2 blackened bananas, which he dropped into the bin immediately as he became so startled by surprise shock to see me standing up in there, just covered with all this filth. I was clearly the last thing that he expected to encounter when dumpster diving, for overripe fruit, I imagine. I promise you I will never forget the puzzled, baffled and befuddled look on his face. He looked profoundly shocked, to say the least, to see me in this bin, submerged from top to bottom with pig swill that was running down my face in huge streaks by this time. For a second we just stared at each other, and for a long time, as though frozen in time, you would have thought that the creature would have bolted, but for some bizarre reason he was too shocked to even move, because he froze like a statue. The creature was unlike anything I've ever observed or seen before, but next to my nasty friends, it was like I was seeing God himself. I know that sounds incredibly crazy, because this creature was terrifying to look at, and yet I could sense his warmth presence that was so comforting, like the smell of cinnamon buns on a freezing cold day. That was what his presence was like. I immediately rifled through the contents of the bin, looking for peaches and plums that were not too bad, or at least not in such terrible shape, and I reached for a crumpled plastic bag that I found lying next to me, and started piling the fruit in the bag, and I handed it to the critter. The creature took the bag from me and inspected the fruit closely to check for himself, and it clearly met with his approval, because he made a very happy, pleased, chattering sound, and even ate a peach in front of me, all the while studying me with a curious, keen interest, as if to say, "What do you get out of standing there in the bin like that?" I climbed out of the bin, covered in sludge, and the creature kept watching me in absolute intrigue and fascination, and even offered me one of the peaches, which was really rather endearing and sweet. I really think he was wondering why I put myself into the dumpster, and found it all very intriguing, and I think this was going over and over in his head, because he just found it so peculiar. I went over to the other dumpsters and looked through the contents with the critter yards away from me, as we began to select some bananas, some grapes and some red apples together that were still in relatively good nick. I handed them to the critter, who put them in his bag. It was so weird and peculiar, because in a strange way I felt so at ease and comfortable with this critter. I remember thinking afterwards that Lisa Bucker looked pretty and sweet on the surface, but on the inside she was a seriously scary, nasty girl. And the critter looked terrifying on the outside, but on the inside I could see he had a heart of gold. The critter looked at me with really big, bright, sparkling eyes, and I sensed that he rather liked me. And then he reluctantly pointed to the woods, as if he was trying to tell me that he needed to go, and I immediately felt very sad. He turned and glided away, and in his hand he carried a big bag of the very ripe fruit. He turned around and nodded. I watched him move, and he was so beautiful, agile, lofty and gracious. It would seem some of the fruit the school actually threw away wasn't completely spoilt, and I imagine the hairy critter made regular trips to the dumpster for some seriously good snacks. I really felt that I'd scored, because while the others had covered me with all this ghastly garbage, I had encountered an angel that day that had brought joy to my heart and a skip to my step. The creature I saw that day was possibly about 7 foot tall, 500 pounds and 3 foot wide, and it was muscular and strong, with very overlong arms and long legs, and huge hands and feet. I remember it had a very distinct cone-shaped head, and the most beautiful expressive face, with very deep-set brown eyes. It was covered in long, shaggy, silver-grey hair, and he had all the characteristics that are so clearly seen in a Bigfoot today. He definitely looked half ape and half human. I realise all these years later that the creature that I actually encountered that day was a Bigfoot, a Yeti, or a hairy man, although I've never ever breathed a word about it until now in your anonymous forum. I remember walking past the girls who'd thrown me into the bin, covered in swill, with a proud swagger to my step, because I had encountered the most awesome creature, and they hadn't. I remember Lisa Bucker looked crestfallen, that I hadn't scurried away like a frightened mouse, as I retreated to the shower to wash off the muck, walking very proudly, with a very self-assured gait. I'll never forget how mad she looked. To cut a long story short, when my dad realised how miserable I was in boarding school, and I told him about the incessant bullying, he stood up to my mother for the first time in his life and insisted that I came back home, which caused my mother to become very aggrieved and angry. Before long, I became the reason why my parents began to bicker, argue and fight, until one day my mother decided she'd had enough and she was going to leave my dad for good, and that was the best thing that happened to me in my young life, and as you would imagine, she left me to be raised by my dad. I remember my dad saying, "It's just you and me, kiddo, against the whole wide world." About a year or so later, my dad finally got remarried to another lady called Patsy, who became my stepmother, and she loved me as if I was her own daughter, and our home became such a happy place. Patsy rebuilt my confidence and enabled me to come out of my shell. She encouraged me to believe in myself again, and before long I was popular in school, receiving top marks. It was a huge transformational turnaround for me. But if you think my story ends here, you would be very wrong. And to all the bullies out there, be very careful who you bully, because it might just come back to bite you. Many years later, I was working as a judge in misdemeanors court cases that included things like public intoxication, prostitution, theft, vandalism, reckless driving, indecent exposure, and possession of cannabis. In my line of business, Class A misdemeanors are considered the very worst, because it may require a full year spent in jail. I also deal with crimes in various categories that could be personal crimes, property crimes, and of course financial crimes, which I won't go into now. The bad news for many is a misdemeanor can stay on your record for life, which can affect your ability to rent property or to be recruited for a job, which is why I always recommend a defence attorney that can help significantly in those situations. Imagine my surprise when I realised that a woman called Lisa Bucker was in my courtroom for a Class A misdemeanor for reckless driving, as she'd been racing through red lights and driving at excessive speeds, endangering the lives of pedestrians and narrowly missing killing someone crossing the road as she had ploughed through a red light at excessive speed. I still remember the day that Lisa Bucker entered my courtroom with an insolent expression on her surly face. I recognised the long blonde hair and those cold, heartless blue eyes almost immediately. "Do you recognise me?" I asked Lisa, giving her a broad beam. "Because, my dear, I most certainly remember you, rather too well, I'm afraid." "Your Honour, I don't recognise you," said Lisa, looking puzzled, as to why on earth she could possibly know me. "Do you remember the time when you stuffed a little girl into the dumpster, and you covered her with pig swill and porridge oats? Do you remember?" "You're Ariel," gasped Lisa, looking mortified. "Yes, I'm indeed her, the very girl you described as having cotton wool for brains. Well, this cotton wool has qualified as a judge." Lisa looked at me with her mouth hanging open. I didn't mean it, Your Honour. It was a silly prank. Really, I said. I think you meant it, Lisa. You certainly convinced your adoring fans to believe that I was an airhead. I'm sorry, Your Honour. I wasn't thinking straight at the time. Oh, I think you were, Lisa. I really do. What do you do for a job, Lisa, may I ask? I don't work, said Lisa. I live with my parents. Why does that not surprise me, I said. Now tell me, Lisa, what is this I hear about you driving through red lights like a maniac and nearly running over a pedestrian? I was upset, Your Honour. My boyfriend broke up with me. I was devastated. I wasn't really thinking what I was doing. I was upset when you put me in the bin, Lisa, all those years ago. But I didn't nearly run you over by thundering through a red light. You nearly killed someone, Lisa, and that's very serious. Luckily for you, the pedestrian scurried out of your way, but imagine if you'd killed her through your reckless incompetence. You endangered somebody's life, Lisa, and that's very serious indeed. You need to think before you act, not the other way round, because next time you may end up killing someone, and imagine living with that on your conscience. I'm sorry, Your Honour. Oh, please be lenient on me. Well, irrespective of what you may believe, Lisa, given our rather unsavoury history, I'm going to be lenient on you today, and I'm sentencing you to 90 days in jail, a $1,000 fine, and a ban on driving for a year. I looked at everyone in the courtroom and said, if any of you think about bullying your classmates, one day you might be on the receiving end of their mercy, as Lisa is today on mine. I'm giving her a lenient sentence, and I'm not allowing her horrendous bullying of me as a young girl to influence my judgment today, which is very lucky for you. Others might not be as forgiving as I am, but I do forgive you, Lisa, for what you did. I slammed down my hammer on the wooden desk, and Lisa looked at me with a bemused expression on her face and said, Thank you, Your Honour. Thank you so much. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.